Battle of the Trident. As if being slow to commit treason was a crime. As he sucked in air, Walder Frey scoffed. But, no, the mockery was to get worse. Bad enough that Eddard Stark and Hoster Tully committed treason and dragged House Frey into a war, but then the fools did it again. Ned Stark went south and got himself captured by the Lannisters. Then that stupid cow Catelyn Stark, Hoster's precious eldest girl, had imprisoned Lord Tywin's youngest son on some perceived slate. In retaliation, Tywin Lannister invaded the Riverlands, as anyone with even the slightest bit of intelligence would have been able to predict. Hoster Tully, or rather his inept son, Ed Muir, called his banners. As an honourable man, Walder had had no choice but to respond. Unfortunately, Ed Muir Tully lost the battle with Jaime Lannister before the Freys had been able to gather their forces. Walder had found himself with no commander and no orders. It made perfect sense for him to remain where he was. When word had reached Lord Walder that Ned Stark's young son was on the way south to rescue his foolish father, he had made a determination. No more would House Frey run around at the behest of idiotic lords who proved they were unfit to wield power. Besides, I owe nothing to Hoster Tully's grandson. Only the Lord of Riverrun could command him. Perhaps not even then. The arrival of Robb Stark Host on the banks of the Trident had been the cause of concern within the household of the Freys. Not to Lord Walder though. He knew that Robb Stark had no time to attack the twins. The noble young boy would want to race south to help his father and grandfather. Walder had smiled when he heard the messages from the Starks asking, practically begging, for his support. The hastily written words spoke of noble concepts like justice, honor, loyalty. As if that argument gained anything when made by a bunch of rebels. What had made Walder really chortle with mirth was the rumor that the Lannisters had, in some way, conspired to murder King Robert Baratheon. Even if that were true, why would it matter to me? The man was a drunken sot, not more capable of running a kingdom than a Greyjoy is of earning an honest living. He had been prepared to send the fools packing. Why take sides against Tywin Lannister when the cause looked to be already lost? But then Catelyn Stark had come before him. Seeing the beloved daughter of Hoster Tully before him like a supplicant had filled Walder Frey with joy beyond his wildest imaginings. Finally, a highborn bowing and scrapping for a favour from him. It occurred to Walder as the woman stood in front of him that he might turn this to his advantage. He had no interest in money. House Frey already had more money than it could count. No, what Lord Walder craved, he admitted to himself, was the respect and prestige that had been denied to House Frey for too long. But, the bitch denied him. The stubborn little sow stood there denying him. All he had asked was for a marriage pact between their houses, but Lady Stark had proved immovable. He had been prepared to dismiss her, send her on her way. Two can play at this game. Then the Honourable Lady of Winterfell deployed her best argument. She invoked the name of Eddard Stark. The woman had reminded him that her husband was supposedly free and on his way home to take command from his green-as-grass son. Defying an ailing Hoster Tully and his inept son and grandson was one thing. Defying Eddard Stark was quite another. Walder Frey had backed down and shackled his cause to the rebels. He had not asked for a price, oh no, he'd simply asked that Robb Stark took a Frey as his squire and considered one of his daughters for marriage. A fair bargain, given the ruin that would be visited on my house should the Stark cause be lost. House Frey committed to the war. They followed Robb Stark into battle across the Riverlands. Lord Walder suffered the loss of his son and heir Stevron, without complaint. This was war after all. He allowed his forces to march into the Westerlands, far away from their home at the Twins. Walder Frey's breathing resumed its usual laboured rasp. I fulfilled my end of the bargain and I was betrayed. Eddard Stark did not return to his family. That Tully bitch lied. Lied to me in my own hall. Threatened me with the terrible retribution dealt out to Oathbreakers in exchange for my support. And then, when the Riverlands were safe and the Lannisters repelled thanks to the forces of House Frey, Lord Stark was nowhere to be found. Doubtless he died in the dungeons of the Red Keep. Catelyn Stark deceived me, and I lost my son for her lies. But worse was to follow. Walder Frey could have forgiven Catelyn Stark's duplicity had she made good on her pledge that her son would honor her word that he would consider one of his daughters for a wife. A deal made all the sweeter by the fact that Robb Stark was hailed as king in the North End of the Trident. When the news reached the twins, Walder Frey had been beside himself with joy. One of his daughters was to be queen. House Frey would be connected to royalty. Let the highborn look down on us then. They'll find us sitting on a throne. Then, the Tyrell bitch arrived at Riverrun. He had read the letters Lame Lothar's letters sent him with mounting anger. The well-shaped cunt of Highgarden had bewitched the new king and convinced him to wed her. Probably got flat on her back and spread her legs as soon as she could. Bitch was pregnant quick enough, wasn't she now? Walder Frey had taken great pleasure in ordering his troops to withdraw from Riverrun. The Ironborn invasion of the north gave him the pretext he needed to appeal to Edmure Tully to make sure such actions were sanctioned. However, there was nothing he could do about Rymon's host in the Westerlands. Stevren's son, Rymon, had taken command, and there was no conceivable reason that could allow Walder to recall his troops from the front. Besides, Rymon had been stationed at Ashmark and had sent nothing but glowing reports of how rich the lands were that he was now occupying. Fool, as if House Frey would ever be able to hold that territory. Still, for a time he had kept his men and holdings safe. When Roose Bolton had arrived at Twins some weeks ago and asked to speak to him, Walder Frey had assumed it was to remonstrate with him over having withdrawn his warriors for the fight in the south. Walder Frey had sat in the high chair of the Twins prepared to give the Northern Lord short shift. True, he had heard rumors of the ruthlessness and cruelty of the Lord of the Dreadfort, but he believed he had nothing to fear. Protected as he was in the safety and security of his own castle, hundreds of his men were within reach. In fact, so confident was he that he had even met the Northern general on his own in an empty hall. Gods know, he needs me more than I need him. He had been shocked by the appearance of the Northern Lord. Lord Bolton looked like a ghost from a wet nurse's tale, a spirit whose body had long since departed this world but leaves something intangible behind to haunt the living. He had expected a bawdy northerner, something akin to Great Jon Umber, who was known to be a giant of man, all muscle and strength. Roose Bolton could not have been more of a contrast. The man was slight, of average height, with loose black hair, well-groomed and oiled. He wore his armor well, but he was not an imposing man. No, not a hulking northern barbarian, but no less imposing for all that. Walder Frey had received the fabled Liege Lord with all due deference. "Hey, I suppose you have been sent by the king." Lord Bolton turned his cold dead eyes onto the Riverlander. "The Queen dispatched me. She would have me take Moat Cailin and open up the route to the north. Seems to me that you've detoured, Lord Bolton. Or perhaps you're lost." Hey. Walder Frey smiled ingratiatingly. "I imagine the invasion by the Ironborn came as quite a shock." "To some perhaps," Roose Bolton replied, emotionlessly. "To my mind the Greyjoys have always been traitorous whores. Leaving the north vulnerable to assault was a foolish decision." Walder Frey was surprised at the other man's honesty. "Criticizing a king is treason, my Lord Bolton." The man before him shrugged dismissively. "I believe King Robb meant well, but he has left the north dangerously exposed. The north is fast being overrun by the invaders." Lord Frey resisted the urge to laugh. "Appears you lot have left yourself in a right sorry state." Roose Bolton looked unmoved, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. "I would like permission to use the Twins as a base while we take the moat." "A base?" Walder Frey snorted. "To take the moat? Surely such a task won't take you Northern warriors a long time." The Lord of the Dreadfort stared at him. "The moat has never fallen to an attack from the south. I have already dispatched scouts into the neck to report on the Ironborn defenses. I have also sent messengers in search of Greywater Watch." Lord Frey cackled. "Good luck with that. The Cranogmen are as slippery as the frogs they're apt to dine on." "You have no knowledge of their location then?" Walder sniffed disdainfully. "Hey, we have no need of their kind. The slimy little reptiles disappear into the bogs as soon as we ride on by. Men of the Riverlands do not venture into the neck without good cause." Lord Bolton tilted his head. "Some might say that they have good cause now." The old man inspected his fingertips. "Hey. I don't jump because Robb Stark pisses his pants." "Do as you must," Roose Bolton said, "and so will I." He nodded in farewell before walking to the main door of the hall, only turning back once he's reached the entranceway. He regarded the Lord of the Crossing. "By the way," he said as he pulled a scroll from his belt, "I have a message for you that might be of interest." Heh, do you now? No doubt a reprimand from the new queen about my taking advantage of Edmure Tully's good nature to pull back my forces. Who wants my attention? Read for yourself. Roose Bolton said, leaving the scroll on a table. You'll be surprised, I promise you. Hash. The next morning Lord Bolton was admitted to the great hall of the twins. Walder Free was in his chair, looking dishevelled and sleep-deprived. Before the doors to the hall even closed, Walder was up out of his chair shouting. Are you insane? Roose Bolton raised a finger to his lips and walked quickly across the hall. Lord Free ignored the other man's attempt to quieten him. You're dealing with Tywin Lannister. Lord Bolton approached the dais and climbed the small number of steps, coming to stand a few meters from Walder Free. Keep your voice down. Walder bristled. I will not be told how loudly to speak in my own hall. Very well. Roose Bolton nodded his head, turned on his heel and walked back the way he came. Wait. Walder called after him. He lowered his voice. Don't go. I would speak with you. Lord Bolton nodded and then returned to his spot a short distance from the much older man. Walder resumed his seat. He raised the letter and shook it at the Northman. Do you have any idea of what this is? Obviously. Bolton locked his cold dead eyes on Walder. Otherwise I would not have given it to you. Free waved off the condescending tone, he shook the parchment again. This is an invitation to commit treason. Not for you. Lord Bolton said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. You have sworn no oath of loyalty to Robb Stark. Your oath was to host a Tully, and he is not long for this world. The Lord of the Crossing was not to be put off so easily. The oath I took applies to his son as well. Do you care? Bolton asked simply. Walder paused in mid-flow. He didn't care. Not really. Stark, Tully, Lannister, Baratheon, he wouldn't piss on any of them if they were on fire. Lord Bolton took advantage of the silence. Let us be frank. Just having this conversation is cause for execution, regardless of oaths. It is treason, no matter how we may quibble. He paused, staring openly at the man in the chair in front of him. Free felt his gut seize. Well then we shouldn't discuss this anymore. He shook his head defiantly, no more. We shall not speak of this again. Bolton offered him a slight smile, though the humor did not reach his eyes. The time to act like the loyal vassal you pretend to be was over the moment you read that letter. The fact that you haven't attempted to seize me for treason, the fact that I do not stand before you in chains is testament you're at least prepared to listen to Lord Tywin's offer. Walder Free's mind raced as he thought about this for a moment. What if I were interested? He asked, caution making him talk slowly. Then you should write Lord Tywin and state your price for following the course he has suggested. Lord Free raised the paper again, the proposal written here. He looked at the parchment. Why would I even consider it? What's in it for me? Roose Bolton nodded slowly. We have an opportunity here to raise our houses to prominence. A position that we are unlikely to get under the new regime. By our actions we can influence the future direction of the entire realm. Walder shook his head. You say that, but Robb Stark is winning this war. As much as I dislike the Tyrells for taking what is rightfully mine, their support of the Starks practically guarantees their victory over the Lannisters. Roose Bolton's eyes seemed to widen slightly. Practically. He let the word hang there for the other man to consider. Walder snorted in disdain. For fuck's sake, the Lannisters' influence has shrunk to the Crown lands. The man in front of him considered for a moment, then shrugged. Perhaps you're right. Perhaps. Walder Free exclaimed in frustration. Tywin Lannister abandoned Harrenhal. He left his precious lands to the tender mercies of the young wolf while he went south to save his grandson from his uncle. Way I hear it, he got there just in time to pull good King Joffrey's chestnuts from the fire, but it was a close-run thing. The Lord of the Dreadfort nodded in agreement. I grant you, the Lannisters are in a precarious position. Oh, you grant me that, do you? How generous of you. Bolton ignored the sarcasm. The fact is, Robb Stark's kingdom is nowhere near as stable as you suppose. No. Walder Free sat forward, his hand gripping the armrests of his chair. Who cares for stability if he's winning? Robb Stark is winning for the moment. Roose Bolton aloud. The alliance of the North, the Riverlands and the Reach is simply too strong for any one force to effectively oppose. Does he think I do not know that? The last time a force of the size was amassed against a single foe, the Greyjoys were all but wiped out. Yet you and Tywin Lannister believe the alliance can be brought down. The old man made no attempt to hide his skepticism. Brought down and humbled, yes. Roose said, nodding, without a hint of humor. Walder eyed him disbelievingly. How can you possibly hope to go against such a large force? Direct attack is out of the question. Bolton agreed. The combined armies are too vast to counter with force alone. Therefore subtly must be employed. Condescending bastard. Walder brandished the letter. Subtly of the kind suggested by Lord Tywin. Indeed. The Lord of the Dreadfort moved a little closer. The entire kingdom that Robb Stark has fashioned is based on the family connection to the Riverlands through his mother and with the Reach through his marriage to Margaery Tyrell. Roose intoned like a maester conducting a lesson for a particularly unruly child. Therefore there are 4 key players. Robb Stark, his wife, his mother and his uncle. Remove them from the scene and suddenly the entire picture becomes much less certain. Roose folded his arms across his chest. As Tywin Lannister points out, if those 4 players suddenly disappeared, then the alliance would shatter. Say what you mean, my lord. Walder spat. Lord Tywin wants me to lure them to my castle and murder them. Roose Bolton merely nodded. Them, and as many of the noble lords you can get your hands on. My men and I can help you there. Lord Free looked at him askance. His blood ran cold at the words being uttered aloud. He fought to keep from gaping. With this done, Roose Bolton went on. The kingdom that will fall apart as surely as a fortress built on shifting sand. Walder Free frowned. How so? The young wolf isn't the great general you make him out to be. There are numerous commanders that could easily take his place. Randall Tully, the Blackfish. Neither of those could combine all 3 regions into one fighting force. If Robb Stark fell, and in the absence of any of his siblings, the group would likely rally around his unborn child. Walder grit his teeth in anger. He had received word of the Queen's pregnancy the day before. It's supposed to be a free queen and a free heir. The Tyrells have shit on my house just like all the other highborn lords before them. If he saw Lord Walder's reaction, Roose Bolton gave no sign. That is why, if we were to act as Lord Tywin requests, killing the Queen is essential. Gladly. That bitch has a lot to answer for. He shook himself from his revelry, put aside his thoughts of revenge. Then the whole kingdom falls apart. As easy as that. The Lord of the Dreadfort looked at him coldly. There will be nothing easy about this. Make no mistake, this is a precarious path. One wrong foot and our houses will be obliterated. Walder Free felt the blood run from his face. He sniffed. One wonders why we'd bother to take the risk at all. Both of us have power and wealth. Lords of noble houses could have sworn I'd seen Bolton roll his eyes. Both of us will reap the benefits of Robb Stark's victory over the Lannisters. A few months ago I would have agreed. Roose Bolton replied. But the Tyrells joining us changes matters. Oh. Walder was confused. I would have thought that a powerful ally like the Reach would have pleased you no end. He looked shrewdly at the man before him. You strike me as a man who likes to bet on sure things. Ordinarily that's true. Bolton answered. But Mace Tyrell is fiercely ambitious. One only has to see how Margaery Tyrell has wrapped the king around her middle finger to see how they intend to play this game. She pushed your family aside with surpassing ease. Walder gripped the armrests of his chair tightly. His eyes blazed. Again, Roose Bolton showed no sign that he had noticed. They have the crown, they have control of Riverrun's council. I have seen firsthand how Margaery Tyrell has browbeaten Edmure Tully. Forced concessions on Lord Bracken. This is only the start. All important positions will flow to them. I hear that the Queen intends to create her own small council. If she does, a betting man would place money that most, if not all, of the positions will go to Tyrell Bannerman. Walder Free considered this. Be of no doubt. Bolton continued. The roots of House Tyrell will grow around the direwolf and choke the life from it as if it had ingested the strangler. When it does, what will happen to us? Hey. Makes no difference to me. Walder said, relaxing his grip on his chair. I'm unlikely to get any favors from the young wolf in any event. Even if that little whore Margaery ran back to the Reach with all her forces, I'd never get anything from those bastards at Riverrun. Catelyn Stark hates me as well, just like the rest of their accursed family. I'll never get position or power. Not under Robb Stark, no. Roose tilted his head once more. Under King Joffrey. Walder looked down at the letter in front of him. He reread some of the words. Lord Tywine doesn't talk about my reward for assisting him in his plan. Lord Bolton face twisted his face into a facsimile of genuine warmth. It is not up to me, of course, but I would use your position to enforce a great many concessions from King's Landing. Bolton cast an eye out the large window overlooking the Trident. To begin, I'd ask for the Riverlands. What? Walder Frey's head jerked up in surprise. The Riverlands. Oh yes. Just as I will ask for the North as my price for complicity. Roose Bolton indicated out the window. Surely it occurs to you that committing actions of the magnitude suggested by Lord Tywine should be given a commensurate reward. This time Lord Walder did gape at his visitor. You think me a fool? Tywine Lannister would never offer me the Riverlands. He has no choice. Roose Bolton replied, as you've already said, Robb Stark is on the verge of defeating the Lannisters. Casterly Rock will fall, given time. I would imagine you could ask for anything you want, Lord Tywine will have no choice but to comply. Pa. Walder Frey chuckled dryly. And then have it all taken away at war's end. Even if Lord Tywine's plan is a success, the fact remains that House Lannister is not equipped to go to war. If you take lordship of the Riverlands, then you gain control over armies and resources equal to anything the king can field at the moment. Walder's eyes had lit up at the thought. Then a dark thought occurred to him. Small chance I'll have of being able to hold the Riverlands if I butcher members of each major house of the region. To say nothing of creating an enemy of the North and the Reach in one fell swoop. Roose Bolton's expression did not change. I have discussed this through letters with Lord Tywine. There are plans in place to prevent retaliation. Really? Lord Walder scoffed. Lord Tywine is going to offer me protection while he hides in King's Landing. He shook his head. No. Even if he did, there is nothing he can say that will convince me he could protect me, even if he offered to. The Lord of the Dreadfort looked squarely at him. You forget. If we do this right, there will be very few witnesses telling tales of anything. No one will know of our involvement. We shall not need promises of protection as we won't be under threat. Oh, you think not? Do you think people will believe that the commanders of the Alliance suddenly dropped dead of their own accord? Walder screeched, no, no, witnesses will survive. Then what will happen to us? After we kill the Tullys and the Starks, not to mention Mace Tyrell's precious daughter. I agree. Roose said, placating. That is why confusion needs to be created, so that no one will know exactly what happened. Walder sighed in frustration. He can't be such a fool. I'd have thought everyone will know what happened. Robb Stark comes here with a portion of his army and gets ambushed by his own bannermen. Or Roose Bolton countered. Robb Stark comes here and is attacked and slain by a third party. Walder frowned. He's mad. Him and Lord Tywine both. Who do you suggest we get to fulfill that role? We get the wildlings down to exact vengeance for generations of Stark persecution. It won't be necessary to look as far as that. Roose Bolton replied. The Iron Islands will be sufficient. Lord Walder felt himself go quite still. The Ironborn. Why would they help us? They wouldn't. Roose Bolton said, his lips curling into the biggest smile yet. They will help themselves. It had seemed so easy when Lord Bolton outlined the plan. Tywine Lannister had written to Balon Greyjoy. The Lannister patriarch had pointed out to the Lord Reaver of Pike that the Lannisters would soon be destroyed. When that happened, the young wolf would turn his attention to fighting the Iron Islands. With the might of the Reach behind him, Robb Stark would easily reclaim the north and take the islands. The last time the mainlands attacked House Greyjoy, it almost ended in their destruction. Roose claimed. Balon Greyjoy's new empire would be lucky to survive a moon's turn once Casterly Rock falls. Instead, Lord Tywine had suggested, join with a number of Robb's bannermen and attack the king while his guard was down. The king's party would be killed, his northern host in disarray. After that the Greyjoys were apparently welcome to try and carve out their new kingdom to their heart's content. This time with a royal warrant saying that whatever northern territory they could claim was theirs. Lord Tywine has been astute in telling Balon that he will be expected to pay the iron price for his kingdom. The Hand has made clear that the Greyjoys will be gifted nothing, they will be expected to take it. Balon Greyjoy may be a wretched cur, Walder said, but he's not a madman. Surely he doesn't expect to be allowed to keep his territory. He has no choice. Lord Bolton responded. He knows he cannot hold the Northmen back and must act to prevent his house being destroyed, a penalty I fear that is inevitable if Robb Stark gets his way. He doesn't look very sorry about it. Still, can't say as I blame him. What about you? Walder asked, curious. You can't be happy with the idea of the Greyjoys being allowed to keep territory in the north. If Roose Bolton was capable of laughter, Walder suspected that he would have laughed then. The Ironborn are a means to an end, Bolton claimed. We need an appropriate catspaw to blame for the killing of the king and his men. Who better than House Greyjoy? A people renowned for cowardly hit-and-run attacks. You, I, even Tywine Lannister will make sure that the blame for the events here will be pinned on them. Then the man's eyes glinted. We will use the realms discussed at the Greyjoys as a unifying factor to push them from the mainland and smash the Iron Islands. Walder openly gawked at his guest. Someone will escape and tell the truth. Naturally Roose allowed. But everyone who matters will say the same tale. Lord Free remained unsure. Are you sure Balon Greyjoy will support this action? Actually the idea of an ambush readily appeals to him. The idea of a bit of deception and treachery appeals to his nature. And to yours, Lord Bolton. Besides, I mean to sweeten the deal by offering Balon his son, Theon, who was captured when my bastard retook Winterfell. In the end, Robb Stark, his family and closest friends will lie dead and the realm will have a culprit. Well, don't you have it all mapped out? Even so, Walder Free said slowly, doubt gnawing at him. The action suggested by Lord Tywine is too bold. To lure the royal party here and kill them under my roof. He looked wide-eyed at the other man. If it did ever get out, I'd be a pariah of all the noble houses of Westeros. Whereas, at the moment you're loved and adored by everyone. Roose Bolton commented with a slight twitch of his lips. True enough. They've always looked down on me and mine. Just because my family has worked its way up for nothing rather than having a fancy name and titles. My ancestors worked for a living, what Tully ever worked with their hands or actually earned anything. That aside, Walder went on. It is a ridiculous risk. One I am not overly inclined to take, despite the promise of being the Lord Paramount of the Riverlands. It is a gamble. Lord Bolton allowed. But we have the opportunity here to rise. An opportunity we never get again. Especially with the Tyrells in the way. There are so many things that could do wrong though. For all that, however, Walder could see himself in his chair being bowed to by all the River Lords, all the men who had looked down at him all his life. One wonders why we need Tywine Lannister at all. Lord Free mused. Greed is unbecoming. Roose chided sharply. This action is only viable because the situation has aligned just so. Under normal circumstances Tywine Lannister would not have made this offer. But he is losing and desperate. We can capitalize if we act wisely. Do this right and there will be a void in leadership in both our lands. But we need Lannister support to solidify our claims on power. Chastised Walder sat back in his seat. How, he asked, committing himself. Do you wish to proceed? Roose Bolton nodded firmly. I have a plan. It had all worked like a dream. Walder had dispatched Lothar to Riverrun with Roslyn with the excuse that she be made one of the new Queen's handmaidens. A request that Margaery Tyrell had granted. The idea had been for Lothar to use the time to suggest that the Northmen should defeat the Ironborn and reclaim their home. Events had lined up perfectly. Roslyn had even unwittingly contributed. Unaware as she was of the final plan, the girl had gone and fallen in love with Edmure Tully. Lothar reported that the relationship seemed genuine and that the new Lord of Riverrun planned to marry the girl. A few weeks ago, Walder would have been ecstatic with such a development, but now it presented a problem. As unwelcome as it was unexpected. After hearing the news, Walder had been tempted to call off the whole scheme. He was going to be the good father to the Lord Paramount without a drop of blood being spilled. But, letters had been written, evidence existed that he meant to betray the king. With a sickening realization, Walder concluded, there was no turning back. Besides, why should I be content for my daughter to be Lady of Riverrun? Let her and the next generation inherit the title from me. I deserve to be Lord Paramount. Ravens had flown between the twins and Pike. Balon Greyjoy had reinforced Moat Cailin, making it impossible for the Northmen to break through. Bolton's bastard withheld his own troops on the northern side and sent loyal men on pointless maneuvers that always seemed to lead, regrettably, to an ambush. Roose Bolton fulfilled his part on the south of the moat. He had sent sorties of loyal Stark troops against Moat Cailin, informing the Ironborn of when and where their assaults would be. The Stark forces had paid a grievous price for no tangible benefit. Walder suspected that Lord Bolton was using the opportunity to thin the ranks of those groups that may cause him problems in the future. Still, makes no difference to me. The only fly in the ointment, at that, was that Howland Reed had refused to comply with Bolton's orders. The man seemed to have a sixth sense and knew they were being sent to their deaths. He did not respond to any commands or pleas for aid. The Crannogmen were waging their own war against the Ironborn and their campaign was having a devastating effect. Balon Greyjoy was incensed. His men at the moat were paying a heavy cost while the Boltons played their slow and deadly game. Again, Walder suspected this was all part of Roose's plan. Keeps the Ironborn weak as well. Walder Free had no illusions. He knew full well that Bolton was a treacherous bastard and would turn on him in the end. Roose had made great play of the fact that they would all blame the Ironborn for the king's death, but he couldn't get around the fact that it had taken place at Walder's castle. That murders had occurred under his roof. Accordingly, Walder made his own plans as well, to make sure that Roose Bolton took the blame for the attack rather than House Free. The story would be that the king's trusted bannerman had turned on him with the help of the Ironborn he was supposed to have defeated. The Tullys and the Starks would be dead. Who better to claim the mantle of vengeance and go after their betrayers than the man whose home was violated by the traitors? Who killed his newly acquired good son? It was a thing of beauty. Walder could have wept for joy when he heard that Lothar had convinced Edmure Tully to have the wedding at the Twins and for Robb Stark to attend with his army. In the middle of a celebration when they are all good and drunk, who would notice assassins among them until it was too late? Balon Greyjoy sent a small force to assist with the preparations. Everything had come together. And then it had all gone wrong. First, that fool Lothar had botched the simple job of knifing a pregnant woman sat at a dinner table. Walder had stared in shock as one of the architects of the scheme was dispatched by Robb Stark in the time it took to say it. Then chaos has ensued. Walder had been beyond rage as the Northmen fought back against the Freys and Ironborn. The element of surprise had been forfeited. Then the crossbowmen men, a group of mercenaries that Walder had paid a small fortune for, had fallen to a blonde giant. This was not part of the plan at all. However, he saw that all was not lost. The Stark men had slowly fallen, unarmed and caught by surprise as they were. When Roose Bolton armored men had taken to the hall, their victory was assured. Then Randil Tarly interceded. Walder Free's heart almost failed as the soldier from the Reach stormed the main hall, cutting men down left and right, a host of loyal men behind him. He saw Roose Bolton, his erstwhile partner, flee through the open doors out into the night. Clearly the man had lost the stomach for the fight. He had sat in his chair, boiling with impotent rage as his men, his family, were overcome. Cut down by the superior numbers of the loyalist forces. When Hosteen went down, Walder had decided he'd had enough and had beat an undignified retreat. Now he was here, alone, out in the dark corridors of his own castle, with his plans laying in tatters around him. It's all the fault of Tywin Lannister and Roose Bolton. I should never have trusted them. They'll pay for this. Walder heard a commotion ahead of him. He slowly made his way down the corridor until an opening afforded him a view of one of the kitchens. He saw his great-grandson Black Walder leading several men in an attack on a lone Northman. The armored warrior stood near the back of the room guarding, it would seem, a closed door. What in the name of the stranger is going on here? Black Walder stayed well back as he directed a man either side of him to attack. The Free soldiers lunged forward, their swords held high. But before they could bring them down, the Northman had intercepted and slashed both men's throats open. Walder winced as one man's head practically fell off his shoulders, hung in place by just the smallest amount of skin. More men rushed in from all around. The Northman seemed undeterred. He parried and slashed at the attackers, moving at a bewildering speed as he countered each thrust. The man used a small wooden buckler on his left arm to block attacks. Within moments all the attackers were dead with the exception of Black Walder and one other man. A nervous man who kept looking to his commander for direction. Lord Free shifted his weight. Black Walder is one of the best killers I've ever seen. As good as the Northman may be, he's tired and injured. They'll bring him down. Then I'll join them and we'll work out our next move. He looked around the kitchen, spied the floor and saw that, in addition to the group that had witnessed attacking the Northman, there were another 4 other corpses on the floor. Black Walder suddenly reached and grabbed the man next to him, seizing him by the scruff of his neck and pushing him forward towards their opponent, using him as a shield. The man squealed in protest, a high-pitched sound that was cut off as the Northman's broadsword sunk deeply into his chest. Walder watched as the Free soldier crumpled to the floor, taking his killer's sword with it. Black Walder dodged round the fallen man and struck out with his dagger. The blade was deflected by the warrior's armor. "If that's all you've got, boy," the warrior said, "then you're in serious trouble." Black Walder snarled and lunged with his knife. The Northman stepped back, using his shield to take the blow, and then lunged in and struck out at his foe. For a moment Walder assumed he missed, but Black Walder fell to the floor gagging, his face reddening, the knife falling from limp fingers. The Northman stepped back and idly pulled his sword from the corpse in front of him. Walder replayed the attack in his mind. For a moment he was baffled, then realization came to him. The Northman had used his shield as a weapon. He had deflected his enemy's attack and smashed the edge of the shield into his exposed neck. Black Walder was clawing at his throat, desperately trying to force air into his ruined windpipe. His face had gone almost purple. The warrior turned to face him, he raised the sword high. "Should have stayed loyal, boy." The blow decapitated Walder's great-grandson. "Fuck this." Walder turned and fled back down the corridor as fast as he could. He quickly lost his breath and had to slow as he rounded a corner and descended a set of stairs set into the stone. He took them too fast and almost stumbled. Cursing, he caught himself and carried on. His body had broken out in sweat and he was shaking terribly. How had it come to this? He reached the bottom of the stairs and paused to get his bearings. By his reckoning he was near one of the river gates that were used to ferry supplies across the river when the causeway was in heavy use. The gates would have been opened early that day to allow the Ironborn to gain access to the castle. He just need to bypass the kennels and he'd be able to see the boats. "If I can get the boats, I'm safe. I'll get an Ironborn to ferry me across the river. I'll rejoin my troops." Surely, he reasoned, the Free host on the opposite bank must have had better luck than those in the hall. They had been armed and ready to carry out their part of the plan. A snarl behind him caused him to whirl in surprise. With a small cry he fell over, landing heavily on the cobbles of the yard. "I'm near the kennels, you fool. Of course there will be animal snarls." With a great deal of effort Walder clambered to his feet. His clothes were sodden and filthy, the fine fabric splattered with mud and grime. Must get to the boats. Walder walked on, gingerly this time. His ankle hurt, he could feel the joint swelling. Biting back tears he pushed on, the thought for safety overriding his pain. He heard more animal sounds as he neared the kennels. The sounds of beasts throwing themselves against locked wooden doors echoed off the stone walls. The volume increased as he neared the building that housed the hunting dogs. His foot tripped over something in the dark, he stumbled over yelping as he put all his weight on his bad ankle. Cursing loudly Walder lashed out at what had almost made him fall. His foot touched something, a body. Leaning close Walder examined the corpse. The man was a Free, a fact confirmed by his leather coat that had once proudly displayed the sigil of the twins. The chest and throat of the man had been ripped to pieces. Blood was congealing over multiple wounds. Has one of the dogs escaped? If so, I may need to take a detour to the boats. A loud snarl interrupted his thoughts. Walder's heart stopped as it dawned on him. Starks's wolf. It had been locked up in the kennels at his own insistence. Almost whimpering in fear and pain, Walder took a few tentative steps forward. There was a loud sound behind him. He turned quickly, much too quickly. He felt his ankle give and he hit the floor with a loud cry. Walder scrambled in the mud, pulling himself onto his front, trying to get to his knees. He looked up. Into the eyes of a monstrous wolf. He froze in fear. He felt his bladder void itself. Hot urine soiled his breeches. Walder Free, Lord of the Crossing, tentatively reached out to stroke the creature. "Hey, friend. Hey, boy. Friend." The wolf looked at him curiously. For a joyous moment Walder entertained the mad notion that he could befriend the creature. Win its loyalty, make it his faithful pet to help destroy his enemies. Destroy Robb Stark with his own wolf, wouldn't that be sweet? Then the creature bared its teeth, white and terrible in the moonlight. Walder tried to scramble backwards, a cry of despair coming from his throat. The wolf snarled and leapt upon him. Then there was nothing but teeth, claws and pain. Notes. All comments welcome. Chapter 38, Tyrion 7. Chapter text. That is unfortunate. Tyrion stared down the length of the council table. He resisted the urge to laugh. Well, it's either laugh or cry. Shame I can't do either. Unfortunate. Tywin Lannister shrugged of the incredulity that accompanied his son's comment. He regarded the roll of parchment in front of him and then looked up and to his left to Varys, surveying the Master of Whisperers with an expression of mild curiosity. This has been confirmed. The bald-headed eunuch nodded his head deferentially. Oh, without a doubt, my Lord Hand. He said, filling his voice with a mixture of apologetic sorrow. Robb Stark is alive, as is Margaery Tyrell. But he is injured. Kevan Lannister asked from across the table. Varys nodded again. He is, Sir Kevan. Reports differ on how badly. Tywin considered for a moment. What of Catelyn Stark and Edmure Tully? The spymaster's face took on a pained expression. I regret, my lord, that I have heard nothing of Lady Stark and Lord Tully. I know they were both at the Twins, but nothing more than that. Well, of course Edmure Tully was at the wedding. It was his nuptials after all. Can't have a wedding without the groom. Cersei spoke up from beside her uncle. We should never have trusted Walder Free and Roose Bolton. We. Tyrion shook his head. As if you had any idea what father's plans were. The very fact they can't be trusted was what made them susceptible to my offer in the first place. Tywin intoned flatly. An offer you made without consulting either the king or myself. Cersei said haughtily. Her father twisted his head to regard her. I have no need to consult with either of you. As Hand of the King I can take whatever actions I deem fit. Cersei flushed. A position you hold by virtue of the king's good graces. You serve at his pleasure. My father's failure has made the little lioness bold. Good for her. But she should remember that she's not leader of the pack here. She's liable to get eaten if she missteps. Tywin's expression did not change, but, for a second, Tyrion saw a flash of fire behind his eyes. If the king wishes to remove me from my post, he has only to order it. Oh please, Joffrey's insanity only extends so far. Tyrion looked from one to the other. Cersei looked ready to explode with rage while Tywin simply looked disinterested. Don't be fooled, Cersei, the ice is thin here. If the king dismissed father, he'd leave King's Landing with the entirety of the Lannister forces. If that happened, Joffrey wouldn't live to see another dawn. The small folk would rip him to pieces. Tyrion's two relatives simply looked at one another, neither giving ground. Finally he himself could stand it no longer. He cleared his throat. As entertaining as this bickering is, he remarked, affecting an air of nonchalance, highlighted by an idle glance out of one of the many council chamber windows. Perhaps we could focus our time and energy on more productive matters. Cersei glared at him. her look one of hatred and bile. Well, rather she turn to me than insult father who's liable to burn this whole city down before he hands it over to you. Not that you have the wit to see that. I agree. Kevan spoke again, looking entreatingly at his older brother. We should turn our attention to more important issues. Our next move needs to be planned carefully. Should have thought about that before you enraged the Starks, Tullys and Tyrells even further against you. Tywin Lannister looked at the far wall of the chamber. He slowly steepled his fingers, resting his elbows on the polished wooden table and setting his forefingers against his lips. Tyrion almost see him considering and discarding options at breakneck speed. For a long moment no one spoke, the other council members being unwilling to break the oppressive silence. It was Cersei who gave in first. She looked angry, an emotion fueled at what she took to be her father's indecision. Turning to Tyrion she adopted a superior look. How much longer can we pay the Golden Company? Oh, do I answer to you now? Tyrion did not bother to consult the ledgers he had brought with him to the meeting. We can pay them for the next 2 months. After that our funds run out. His sister looked pityingly at him. You're the master of coin. It's your job to find the money. She paused to spare a glance at her father. Raise more taxes. Bitch. From where, sweet sister? We have drained the city dry. The people are starving and destitute. Any more taxation and we'd have more riots. This time he did open his ledger's books so he could quote numbers directly if necessary. He'd be damned if he was going to be made a fool in this. He'd brought up the riots to play on Cersei's fear of the same events that almost killed both her and her son a few months prior. Besides, there is a practical consideration: punitive taxation whittle down trade, maybe even cause it to cease altogether. Traders have to be able to operate, otherwise we get no tax at all. Imbecile. Cersei fumed. Can you not see that without money we have no chance of continuing the Golden Company's employment? We'd lose a third of our soldiers. She looked from her father to her uncle, but both looked disinclined to speak. Use the company to reinforce the gold cloaks, use them to enforce order. Use our veteran force to act as crowd control. Tyrion asked, scorn in his voice. Why not? It's not like they have any other use. She shot an angry look at her father. Besides, all your hired swords do is sit in the brothels and taverns and wait for orders while draining our treasury. You mean that sell swords don't work for free? Astonishing. We want them to visit the taverns and brothels. Tyrion said, fighting to contain his temper. It means we get their wages back in taxes. They should be earning their pay in the field. Cersei spat, keeping them in the city is ruinous to our finances. Ah, there we are. The real complaint. What would you have us do? Tyrion asked, all innocence. Have us march up the King's Road and offer battle to the Stark forces at the Twins? Shouldn't bait the trap so obviously, but I just can't help myself. Yes. Cersei said, glancing at Tywin out of the corner of her eye. The enemy is in disarray. We should take advantage of the events at the Twins and march on them with a well-armed force. I would remind your grace that would leave the city open to attack. Sir Kevan said, tiredly. What other option have we? Cersei cried, almost on the verge of hysteria. We are on the brink. A touch dramatic, but she isn't wrong. Enough, Cersei. Tywin spoke with crushing finality. There will come a time to confront the Starks with the forces we have here, but that time is not yet here. My lord. Pycelle roused himself from his perpetual slumber. If not now, when? A rare valid point from the doddering old man. Tywin barely looked at the aged maester. When I have had time to prepare our allies. Oh, this was too good. What allies would these be? Tyrion enquired from his end of the table. He watched his father closely. Who would ally with us once our involvement in the squalid affair at the Twins is known? His father turned his eyes on him. Even down the long length of the table Tyrion felt the intensity of his father's green eyes, the cold orb seeking to know all there was to know about him. He resisted the urge, long ingrained since childhood, to wilt under the look. The blame is Walder Frey's. Not mine. Tyrion tutted at the obvious falsehood. Walder Frey is many things, but a brave man. No. He would never dared embark on such a course unless he had assurances. Which he got from me. The hand replied with a slight tilt of his head, as if inviting his youngest child to oppose him. Do you disapprove? A ripple went round the room. This was the first time that Lord Tywine had actively admitted his part in the scheme to kill Robb Stark, his queen and his closest bannerman. When Varys had arrived in his chambers to tell him the news, Tyrion had, quite rightly, been appalled. Still, if one got over the horror of the event, that of butchering guests at dinner, especially when you consider that there was a pregnant woman, Tyrion had to admit a grudging respect for his father. If it had worked as intended, we could have won the whole war. Thinking out loud, Tyrion replied. I'm all for cheating. This is war. And we're losing. But to slaughter them at a wedding. Tell me. His father responded in his most lecturing tone. Why is it more noble to kill 1,000 men on a battlefield than to kill a dozen at dinner? Makes all the difference in the world, you bastard. Besides, it's not as if you didn't instruct the Frizz to attack Robb Stark's men outside the Twins at the same time. So that's why you did it. To save lives. Lord Tywine brought the flat of his hand onto the table with a resounding crash. To end the war. To protect the family. I'm in this world a little while longer, and I will use that time to defend the Lannisters, to defend my blood. I will use any weapon at my disposal to achieve that end. Tyrion paused, letting his father's latest words seep in. Well, perhaps. And maybe if it had worked, we'd have all sat here and applauded your brilliance, your masterstroke that snapped victory from the jaws of defeat. But Tyrion hesitated, allowing a grim smile to cross his face. You failed. Tywine stood abruptly. He walked round to the back of his chair, allowing his forearm to rest on the wooden top, above the cushioning. He glared at his son for a moment before taking a deep breath and then turned to address Varys and Pycelle in a measured tone. As I say, it is unfortunate that the events we had planned did not go as we would have wished. However, he glared again at Tyrion. It is enough that we have sowed chaos and dissension amongst the ranks of the Northerners and Riverlanders. Enough. Others take me. Lord Varys. Tywine ordered, we will proceed as discussed. I would have an answer from Daenerys Targaryen as soon as possible. Tyrion started in his chair. Gods, not that again. Varys nodded quickly. Of course, my lord. I will send word through my little birds that we require an answer to your offer. Grand Maester, send a raven to Pike. Tell Balon Greyjoy that, as far as I am concerned, our arrangement still stands. He did his part by lending support at the Twins. I shall honor my end of the bargain. Any territory the Ironborn capture in the north and the Reach will be his at war's end. Furthermore, you may suggest that King Joffrey is prepared to formally recognize Balon's crowning and acknowledge him as a brother king. Cersei's mouth dropped open in shock. She looked around the table but found no allies in confronting her father. As a result, she could do nothing but sit there fuming. When you have done that, Tywine continued, staring at the Grand Maester. You are to send word to Dorne and the Vale. They are to act as already instructed. I would have all the parties ready within a week. What's he referring to now? The Queen Regent clearly had no idea what was going on either. Tyrion's sister looked at her father. Through gritted teeth she spoke once again. When does the king get to know of these instructions? Tywine looked at his daughter. When he has a need to know. Cersei's face went a deep shade of red. She clearly didn't know how to respond to this slate. Kevan Twine spoke to his brother, step up the drills. I want the fresh levies ready to be incorporated into the main force and ready to march in under a month. My lord, Kevan responded, inclined his head in obedience, resignation filling his voice. Tywine nodded abruptly. He turned and walked away from the table. And just where will the army be going? Cersei asked, her voice going higher as her target made for the exit. She might as well have been addressing a stone wall for all the recognition she got. Within moments their Lord Father was through the door and on his way to his personal chambers. The council sat in silence for a moment. Pycelle was the first to move. He quickly gathered his scrolls and made a hasty exit, shuffling across the floor as if afraid he'd fall if his feet came higher than a few inches. Varys was the next to go, standing gracefully, offering a bow to the table and then quickly leaving with a swish of red velvet. Then they were alone. Cersei, Tyrion and Kevan. For a long moment no one spoke, then Kevan exhaled deeply, shaking his head at his own private thoughts. I don't recall father ever being the first to leave a small council meeting, Tyrion said. And we've had so many of them of late. Indeed. Kevan agreed, pouring a goblet of wine from a pitcher on the table. Oh, yes. Cersei said, her tone biting. We talk and talk, yet we learn nothing. Tyrion winced. Deftly done, sister. Their uncle looked up from his thoughts and smiled sympathetically. I apologize for you not being informed of your father's plans earlier, but we need to keep a tight grip on information. The plan involving Walder Free was incredibly sensitive. Obviously, Tyrion retorted. It's not every day that you plan cold-blooded murder on this sort of scale. He adopted a look of mock horror. Gods, know what would happen if it came out. Kevan nodded again, closing his eyes as if in pain. There is a plan in place to make sure that doesn't happen. Cersei opened her mouth to rage at her uncle, but Tyrion got in first. What exactly was the plan, uncle? He warned his sister with his eyes. Be silent, you little fool, and we might actually learn something. He could do nothing but pray that she got the message. Who knows, Cersei and I may be late to this little party, but now that we're here there may be something we can do to help. Kevan Lannister looked doubtful. He paused, considering while he took a sip from his goblet. Tyrion let him ponder, praying silently that his sister would keep quiet and let their uncle come to his own conclusion. He'll either tell us or he won't, ranting and raving will not move him. I suppose, Kevan said slowly. There's no harm in telling you now. If Roose Bolton or Walder Free were captured at the Twins, then all of the Seven Kingdoms will know soon enough. Tyrion nodded encouragingly. In truth, he knew a lot of the background to this. He'd had no idea of the actual plan of attacking the Twins, but he'd long suspected that his father was corresponding with potential allies in the North and Riverlands. Varys had informed him weeks ago that Pycelle was dispatching ravens at a heady rate. There was only so many places they could be going. Tywin was aware, from even before he left Harrenhal, that our house was in a very bad position. Why then did he leave Harrenhal? Cersei exploded, her face almost as scarlet as the color of the silk dress she wore. Couldn't keep quiet for more than a moment, could you? Tyrion thought despairingly. Well, Kevan said, angrily. If we hadn't left Harrenhal when we did, we would have lost the capital, and you and the king would now be held hostage by Stannis Baratheon. True enough. My trick with the wildfire backfired amazingly. Though he's probably wrong about the hostage part, Stannis would have simply executed them both. I would also add that if it hadn't been for your brother's foresight of employing the Golden Company, we'd probably still have lost to Lord Stannis's forces. If not for the fact we could hit them at both sides at once, we'd have been extremely hard-pressed to force the invaders back. Cersei grit her teeth so hard that Tyrion thought she might well break them. His sister would never acknowledge his role in the Battle of Blackwater save to castigate him for his mistakes. Gods know there were many of them. However, Kevan went on, holding up a hand to stay Cersei should she offer any objections to his last. We were determined to leave Harrenhal in any event. Oh really? Cersei said, confusion in her tone. Why was that? Gods, she believed he's lying to cover up a tactical mistake. It was pointless staying at Harrenhal. Kevan said, taking another sip of wine. The whole point of being there was to try and pin down Robb Stark's forces. A strategy that worked initially. Few of the Riverlanders went west with him. But then everything changed. The Tyrells. Yes, they do have a habit of shifting the game. Any troops pinned down by keeping forces at Harrenhal would have been replaced, and then some by the soldiers of the Reach joining Robb Stark's cause. Even worse, their overwhelming numbers came through the south, where we least expected them. Tyrion saw Cersei come to the same realization. Curse Mace Tyrell. She seethed. Curse his ambitious, treacherous hide. I was really counting on his ambitious side when I sent Littlefinger down to negotiate an alliance with him. As for treason, I don't recall Lord Tyrell ever swearing allegiance to Joffrey. And curse Littlefinger. Cersei said, casting a dark look at Tyrion as if she could read his mind. If he had been as clever as he thinks he is, he'd have been able to reach an agreement with that fat oaf who calls himself Lord of Highgarden. I suppose that's my fault as well. It's a wonder that King's Landing hasn't fallen into the sea given I was in charge. Though, he reflected, I did almost burn the city down, so maybe she has a point. Tyrion's mind quickly went back, as it often did, to that fateful map and Stannis's little trick with the wildfire. Try as I might, I can't understand how things happened the way they did. Tyrion's back flared with pain, as if to remind him of the consequences of his failure. Anyway, Kevan went on, glancing disapprovingly at his niece. We were only staying put in the hope that we might be able to find a way back to the Westerlands, or that Petyr Baelish could somehow sway the support of Lysa Arryn. Of course. Either father could have assisted Devan at Casterly Rock or used the Knights of the Vale to sweep around and attack Brynden Tully. Perhaps both. Unfortunately, Kevan said, taking a longer sip from his wine. We received word that Stannis had attacked the capital with most of his force. Absent any allies in the region, and with the Tyrells causing havoc, it seemed we were needed elsewhere. We surrendered the Westerlands. Cersei raged, not letting go of her point. Without a fight. She really is as idiotic as she is beautiful. The Westerlands were lost the minute the Tyrells allied with the Starks. Kevan said plainly. To think otherwise is folly. He set the goblet down on the table in front of him. Our defeat at Oxcross took place before the Tyrells even arrived on the field. We were in danger of losing the Westerlands in any event, and that was before Randil Tarly arrived and smashed through our southern border like a knife through cheese. A terrible choice had to be made. We were doing nothing of use at Harrenhal, so we headed south to make safe the city. Unfortunately, Tyrion sighed, allowing a note of sorrow to enter his voice. You found a heaving mess down here. Hopefully, if he feels I'm downcast, he'll feel the need to raise me up and make me feel better. Gives me more license to ask questions. That's not true, Tyrion. Kevan stated, looking unblinkingly at his nephew. You did the best you could in very trying circumstances. I know your father thinks likewise. That's far more forgiving than father is ever likely to be. However, the fact remains that we are short of money and soldiers. Kevan said slowly, his face reflecting the dire situation they were in. When we arrived in King's Landing, we were forced to acknowledge that our situation was precarious. We face a force the size of which hasn't been seen in these lands since the rebellion against the Mad King. Tyrion knew the answer, but he felt he needed to say it out loud. So the only option was to try and split the alliance from within. Have the king's own bannermen turn against him. Kevan nodded slowly, eyeing his goblet. Exactly. Tywin knew that Lord Bolton and Lord Free would be unlikely to be happy with the situation and, perhaps, could be tempted with the offers of power and money. The Boltons have an ancient rivalry with the Starks. We were convinced we could capitalize on that. Likewise, the Freys have no love for the Tullys, and the marriage between Robb Stark and Margaery Tyrell was likely to rub even more salt into an already open wound. But surely, Tyrion pointed out, it was a terrible risk for us to take. Not particularly. Kevan stated. If Bolton and Free were successful, then Robb Stark and his main advisors would be dead. If they failed, well, 2 of the Stark principal bannermen had openly rebelled against the young wolf. A rebellion like that would have had to be put down brutally. Even if Stark managed this quickly, the infighting would weaken his own side. Just out of curiosity, what did you think was going to happen if the attack had been successful? Tyrion asked. His uncle topped up his drink. The north would have been given to Lord Bolton, who would have had to fight a civil war within the region in order to assert his control over the other northern houses. He has allies in the region, so it is likely he could make a good fight of it against the Loyalists. Plus, he'd have had to fight a war to repel the Ironborn. The struggle would have kept the North from fighting us for years. And the Riverlands? Tyrion enquired. Out of the corner of his eye he saw Cersei watching intently. Bless her, she's getting quite an education. With Edmure dead, we'd have supported Walder Free as the new Lord Paramount. Kevan replied. By doing so, Tywin suspected the region would disintegrate into feuds and power squabbles. Again, no threat to us. Tyrion's uncle leaned back in his chair, setting his elbows on the armrests. We would have ensured it by continuing to spread rumors. This time over who was responsible for the deaths at the Twins. Continuing to spread rumors? Tyrion asked. Kevan sighed. I suppose it makes no difference now, he said slowly. Tywine has been using various little birds and Pycelle's agents to spread rumors about the king and queen for the last few months. Surprise rendered Tyrion speechless. Have we sunk so low that we've engaged in tavern gossip to win our wars? It was his sister who spoke. What did the rumors say? Kevan looked at her. It started at Ashmark. Robb Stark was injured and was tended by Jane Westerling. Her mother, Lady Sybil Spicer, wrote to Tywine and asked how she might support the cause. She had no time for Robb Stark and was desperate to prove that she and her kin weren't traitors. Stupid woman didn't know which way the wind was blowing. Tywine directed Lady Sybil to spread rumors that the king had bedded her daughter, betraying his new wife. She did that. Tyrion asked incredulously, sacrificed her own daughter's honor just so that she might gain our favor. Tywine believed that, after the war was won, Lady Sybil intended to let it be known that Robb Stark raped her daughter. Probably by implying that if she didn't give in to his lusts he would have had her family executed. And the bitch was eager to convince father that she wasn't a traitor. It was a cheap trick. Kevan allowed. But we had to do something to drive a wedge between the Starks and Tyrells. Any dissension could only favor us. Did the rumors have the desired effect? Not really. Kevan said sadly, it certainly didn't affect the campaign. This talk of the Tyrells reminds me. Tyrion remarked. Even if we had been successful in killing Robb Stark, his mother and uncle and brought chaos to the Riverlands and the North, there is still the Reach to contend with. If Margaery Tyrell and her brothers were to die, especially in circumstances like this, then surely we would solidify Mace Tyrell as a foe. Fool though he may be, he would certainly scour the realm for those responsible for killing his children. His retaliation would be swift and sure. Retaliate. Kevan repeated, looking shrewdly at his nephew. Retaliate against whom? Tyrion opened his mouth to speak, but then it struck him. Damn. He's right. How would Mace Tyrell know we were to blame? All he'd have is a bloodbath at the twins and no discernible culprit. Everyone would blame everyone else. It would be impossible to discern fact from fiction. As soon as word reached us of the events, Kevan went on, we'd have sent messages to Lord Tyrell offering our sympathies and suggesting an alliance. Seeing as how a pact with the North had resulted in the death of 3 of his children, Mace Tyrell would probably be grateful for the chance to ally with their enemies. Tyrion had to admit there was a certain elegance to the plot. Of course there would be rumors that we were somehow involved, but we'd deny all knowledge, call it all baseless lies. Ultimately use the Tyrells' thirst for vengeance in attacking the Freys and the Boltons, providing that they even survived their own internal struggles. Kevan hesitated. Your father even intended to offer your hand in marriage, Cersei, to seal the pact. Marriage to whom? Cersei said, confused. Not Mace Tyrell. She shuddered at the thought. He is already married. Quite so. Kevan replied, a knowing smile curling his lips. But his son Willers is not. Ah, of course, the last surviving offspring of Mace Tyrell. Had father's plan worked, of course. The Queen Regent sat bolt upright, her face darkening with anger. Father should never have dared to even think of such an arrangement without discussing it with me. Well, it was just a thought. Kevan soothed. And won't happen now in any case. No, not that we've failed utterly. 7 hells though, I may have hated the scheme after the fact, but I can't deny it would have been an absolute masterstroke. What are our plans now? Tyrion asked, ignoring his sister's hate-filled look. Kevan sagged in his chair. Gods, he looks so dejected. I imagine talking through this is more for his benefit than ours. As to that, we will act as your father has directed. Messages will be sent requesting support from Dorne and the Vale. Baelish will never support us. Cersei stormed. He'll sit in his mountain hideaway and let us all war around him. He would, Kevan replied, were it not for the fact that your father has informed him that he intends to write to the Starks stating that it was Baelish that betrayed Ned Stark during their attempted coup. Cersei frowned, her anger momentarily forgotten. Baelish will just deny it surely. Of course he will, Kevan smiled. But your father has his ways. I imagine it will be a message that we allow to fall into enemy hands that will detail the nature of what happened. It will have something like praise for Lord Petter's actions during the arrest of Lord Stark, words of thanks for his loyalty. Or something to that effect. Yes, if you wanted to bring Littlefinger down on our side, that would be the way to do it. He'd run scared of Robb Stark's vengeance. They take betrayal very seriously in the north. What is this nonsense of treating with the Ironborn? Cersei demanded, changing topics once again. Does father really mean to allow the Greyjoys to hold territory they capture? Her uncle shifted in his seat. For the short term, yes. Seeing the Queen's anger, he went on. We will use the Ironborn to confuse the enemy, allowing them to conduct their hit-and-run raids across the western coast. All the better to destabilize the Starks and Tyrells. We will have plenty of time to deal with them when we win. If we win. Tyrion took a deep breath. Is father really hoping to pursue this nonsense with Daenerys Targaryen? For the first time their uncles looked uncertain. He nervously ran his fingers up the stem of his goblet. I believe your father is set on that course, yes. A letter has been sent to Essos detailing the terms of an alliance with House Targaryen. As you know, your father has offered her safe passage back to Westeros, reinstatement of her land and titles, and even the position of queen should she marry Joffrey. Tyrion saw Cersei bristle at the last part. Give it up, Cersei, you effectively ceased being queen when Robert died. For our part, Kevan stated, we need her support if we're going to have any chance of fighting the Starks and Tyrells. Pycelle says her dragons would still be infants. Cersei said hotly. That's if they even exist at all. Your father is unconcerned by the stories of these dragons. Kevan said, he is interested in them, but only in as far as he can use them as symbols. The same could be said of the Dragon Queen herself. What is of more importance to us, Kevan concluded, is the army the Targaryen girl leads. 10,000 unsullied, several companies of sellswords, including the Second Sons and even a contingent of Dothraki. Tyrion shook his head. Does father really think we can convince Daenerys to support us? We were Robert's supporters. Cersei married him for fuck's sake. We're almost directly responsible for murdering her father, brother, niece and nephew. It is accepted. Kevan declared, loyally standing up for his brother's plans. That Daenerys Targaryen wants to return home and rule here. We happen to need her support to continue to fight this costly, ruinous war. We are, to all extents and purposes, on the same side. If you believe, then you can join the ranks of the Joffrey and the Mad King. Surely it would be to her advantage to let us fight it out amongst ourselves. She can then just pick of the winner who will be weakened from the fight. The war could take years. Kevan replied, your father will never surrender, and we have enough soldiers to make a fight of it. And, should we lose, the Starks and Tyrells will have control of the entire realm. Better for her to have a base of operations and an army already here and waiting for her arrival. Tyrion could see that he would get no traction here. Kevan was too loyal to his brother to see that such a scheme was folly. Riven by problems and contradictions. Oh, I know, father will kill the girl as soon as he has control of her army, but still, she'd have to be the Mad King come again to accept the offer. Father's plan only works if she agrees and comes here to fight on our behalf. In the meantime we will gather our own forces. Kevan said. The enemy is injured. I suspect your father wishes to strike as soon as possible to gain the best advantage. The army is being readied, and I suspect he will lead it. He paused, looking at them both. Well, him, along with Jaime. For a comical moment both Cersei and Tyrion assumed the same expression of utter bafflement. Jaime. Cersei breathed, as if having not said the word for so long her mouth struggled to utter the sound. Her uncle smiled kindly at her. Indeed. Robb Stark had taken to imprisoning Jaime at Riverrun during his campaign in the west. However, when he went north he took your brother with him. By all account he was imprisoned in the dungeons at the Twins. Tywin made it part of the deal with Walder Free that Jaime was released as soon as he arrived and allowed to slip out while no one noticed. Seeing their expressions, Kevan's smile widened. By now he should be well on his way back to us. Cersei stared in disbelief, though Tyrion could see hope in her eyes. Really? Cersei exclaimed, looking longingly at her uncle, willing the news to be true. Careful, sister. Tyrion almost warned. The rumors about you and Jaime are just that, don't give anyone cause to believe them. Yes, Your Grace. Kevan said, beaming at her. Providing nothing happens to him on the road, I suspect your brother will be with us shortly. How do we know he'll be safe? Cersei demanded, doubt all over her face. He's safer on the road, traveling her than in a dungeon at Riverrun. Tyrion retorted. Gods help the soul that tries to prevent Jaime getting back to us. After spending the better part of a year in captivity, I wouldn't want to be the one that gets in his way. His sister nodded, more to herself than to Tyrion. As I say, Your Grace. Kevan finished. We should know in a short time if your brother escaped successfully. Wonderful, he can arrive just in time to be executed by Queen Daenerys for murdering her father. As he walked the long passageways through the Red Keep to his chambers, Tyrion thought over the meeting he had just been a part of. Uncle Kevan has never spoken that way before, not without father present. He must have had a reason to do so, but I can't see what it is. One thing is certain. Kevan Lannister would never have told them as much as he had without Tywin Lannister's knowledge and approval. Tyrion went through the options. Did his father wish to gain his children's support by involving them in his plans? Unlikely. Tywin Lannister would do whatever he deemed necessary without once feeling the urge to share with them what he was doing. We're all puppets in his little show. Look closely and you can even see the strings. He considered. Maybe not support, maybe our consent is what he's after. Why Kevan though? Why have him give us the information? The imp reflected. None of the information our uncle gave us was of particular use. It involved plans and events that were already well known. Aside from Jaime potentially being freed, there was nothing new in what we were told. Besides which, we can't do anything to hinder Jaime's flight home, so there's no harm in us knowing. Tyrion stopped suddenly. No, he doesn't want our support, but he does need our consent to carry out his plans. Gods be good, he needs us. Joffrey needs to be managed properly to convince him to marry Daenerys Targaryen, and he needs me to run the city when he goes off to war. Better to have us nice and compliant for when the time comes to make his move. And how better to achieve that than to let us believe we're now part of the inner circle, privy to secret knowledge. He had seen Cersei lap it all up, like a thirsty man given a pitcher of water. Tyrion though was more cautious. Father's plans aren't as wonderful as he makes out. They're either genius or madness. He sighed as he carried on his progress through the keep. I suppose we'll either know which when we judge it by the only measure possible, success. Chapter 39, Brian I. Chapter text. The woman reached her hand towards the bowl by the bedside. In her hand was bunched a cloth, already soiled with sweat and a little blood. The hand entered the shallow bowl and slowly rotated, allowing the small piece of fabric to become sodden with water. Gently she lifted it out, wrung it slightly to remove some of the excess liquid, and returned the damp cloth to her patient's brow. Margaery Tyrell mopped the sweat from her husband's forehead. She tenderly brushed some of the loose curls of the king's hair away from his eyes, closed though they were. Your Grace. The queen gave no indication that she had heard the girl's voice. The handmaiden looked nervously to the person who had just entered the room and joined her. Myra Forrester indicated she would handle the situation before stepping forward and stood on the opposing side of the bed as her mistress. Your Grace. I can hear you, Myra. You and Saya both. Myra took the biting comment in stride. Then you know that a meeting of the council has been called. A messenger has arrived from Greywater Watch. Margaery did not stop attending her husband. She reached out and stroked the king's arm, her hand looking pale and delicate against the muscled limb. Have the messenger came to me here. Your Grace. Myra said, swallowing slightly. It would be better if you attended the council downstairs. You are needed. Margaery looked up. Tell me, Myra, is any one of the lords downstairs worth more than the king? The girl blushed slightly. No, Your Grace, of course not. The queen returned to her task. The cloth went back into the bowl before being raised out and again wrung of water. Well then, leave me to attend my husband. If people need me to decide matters, then they can come here. No, Your Grace. The queen regarded her handmaiden fiercely. You dare? The Forrester girl stood her ground. Yes, Your Grace. I do dare. Maester Lewin has silent sisters and maesters from Riverrun attending the king. He can spare your presence for a few hours. I know you want to be here, but you must be seen. There are decisions to be made. Matters require your attention. There are rumors everywhere. The Queen's eyes hardened. I would thank you not to mention rumors to me, Myra. I almost made a terrible mistake due to listening to idle gossip. Myra nodded understandingly. I know, your grace. But do not compound almost making a mistake with actually making one now. The lords are in uproar. In the king's absence you must take control. He is not absent, Margaery declared, indicating her husband. He lies here, wounded. Almost murdered by his own men. The traitors failed. He will recover, your grace. Myra said, facing the queen's wrath head-on. The kingdom may not if someone doesn't take charge. The girl took a deep breath. You are the queen. Act like it. The warrior smiled to herself. This one has a steel that has yet to show its full toughness. But then I shouldn't be surprised, given who her father is. Brienne of Tarth squeezed through the narrow passage down from the balcony. Her wide shoulders making the small space difficult to navigate. This was much easier when I climbed up and over the balustrade rather than having to endure this ridiculousness. As with everything, the Frizz cheapness when it came to spending money had extended to the design of their castle. She arrived in the main hall of the twins, sighing as her body could now. There was dead bodies everywhere. The floor was littered with corpses. Brian looked it all over with a mounting sadness. So many dead. And who knows why. Armored men were picking their way through the injured, calling for medical attention for those on their side who were injured, spearing those who wore the livery of either the Frizz, Boltons or Greyjoys. There would be no mercy tonight. Not for those who would attack an unarmed party at dinner. Does anyone have the king? This came from the center of the room. Randall Tarly stood like an island of tranquility in a sea of chaos. There was carnage all around him. His armor was soaked in the blood of his foes. His great sword was smattered with the men he had slain during the Tyrell charge into the room. The charge that saved the king's life. Brian was certain that, had the Tyrell's force not arrived when it had, then the king's party would have been slain. They had fought valiantly, but they were grossly outnumbered and, for the most part, unarmed. Many of the king's party had been killed in the opening moments of the struggle, and the rest had been fighting a losing battle, overwhelmed by the speed and surprise of the attack. She had done what she could. Brian had not wanted to leave Lady Catelyn alone at the side of the room but the woman, and ordered her to take the balcony, to stop the murderous efforts of the assassins who rained down death on their unprotected victims. I did as I was ordered. Brian thought grimly as she searched the room desperately for her mistress. There was no sign of her, nor of her son or good daughter. How can this be? Where would they have gone? Brian cursed to herself, anger and shame warring within her. During the fight she had slain the musicians. Once she had been amongst them with a knife and sword. It had been relatively short work. She had picked up a crossbow and used it to protect Lady Catelyn as she had made her way across the hall. Brian knew she would be intent on reaching her son. She had wanted to scream at the lady. To decry her foolishness. It would have been no use. She will try to get her son, even accepting that she may die in the attempt. Brian had had no choice but to do what she could from the balcony. She had trained another crossbow on the crowd. As the fighting suddenly ceased, Brian had watched helplessly as Lady Catelyn had held Joyous Free hostage. She observed, with mounting horror, as Walder Free stated his indifference to his wife's impending death, then watched in dread as Roose Bolton stepped forward to threaten the king. Brian had been torn between firing at Roose Bolton or defending her mistress. As she paused indecisively, the great hall doors had been blown inwards and a rescue party had arrived. Lord Bolton had watched for a moment, evaluating numbers, and then fled through the nearest exit, flanked by his guards. Seeing the king was safe from immediate attack, the warrior woman had turned her attention to protecting Catelyn Stark. She had instantly had to fire at a man threatening to end her life as she made a mad rush through the hall. With the crossbow now useless, Brian had searched around for another. As she searched, she had been set upon by a recently arrived free guard who had quietly climbed the narrow stairway to the rear of the balcony. I was so intent on my task I missed his approach. The man dove at her, a knife in his right hand. Brian swayed backwards, letting her attacker get close. She then stepped in, clasped the man's wrist with both hands, pinning his arm to his side and preventing him from using his weapon against her. For several minutes they resulted in the small space, each fighting for purchase. Abruptly, Brian let go with one hand, formed it into a fist and smashed it into the man's face. Once, twice she struck, knocking the man senseless. She bent low, seized the man by neck and groin and then upended him over the balcony railing. His quick cry of surprise cut short by the stone floor below. But when she looked back into the hall, the king, queen and Lady Caitlin were gone. The table in the middle of the room had been abandoned with only dead and wounded men ringed around it. Now, with the fight over and Brian returned to the hall, she could see no sign of them. Brian searched desperately to no avail. A few meters from her the Tyrell general looked about him, his eyes were clear as he surveyed the room. He might have been scrutinizing a piece of art for the dispassion with which he regarded the work of him and his soldiers. The king. He bellowed at his men, repeating his request. Or the queen? Or Lady Caitlin? Brian asked, making her way forward. The Lord of Hornhill looked at warily. Who the hell are you? I'm Brian of Tarth, my lord. Lord Selwyn's daughter and sworn shield to Lady Caitlin. The man's eyes flickered in recognition. Ah yes, the girl who won the melee at Bitterbridge. Brian nodded. I had that honor, my lord. The man looked unimpressed. What are you doing here at Riverrun? War is no place for a woman. She grit her teeth, refusing to rise to the rebuke. I am sworn to Lady Caitlin, my lord. You said. The lord looked around. Well, if the Tullys have women protecting them, then it's no wonder they get ambushed by their own bloody bannermen. Brian felt shame crush her. We had no warning, no idea of what the Frizz or Boltons intended. She wanted to rage at the man, felt the cold, familiar anger uncoil within her. She opened her mouth to reply. A voice came from behind her. Lay off the girl, Tully. Lord Randall looked past her. Brian quickly turned and saw Sir Brynden Tully look at her appraisingly. Like Brian herself, the Blackfish wore no armor, just a simple tunic. He'd rid himself of his fine robes when the fighting started. Yet he is completely uninjured, even though he went where the fighting was fiercest. The knight stood sweating, a sword at his side, but otherwise showed no signs of his exertions. Randall said nothing, he merely looked around the hall. He turned back to the Blackfish. I have no time for this now. We have lost the king. How do you lose the king? Sir Brynden demanded. I saw him in the middle of the room. Not 3 feet from where you stand now. War's a messy business. Tully said calmly. The room was chaotic. Forgive me, my lords. Garland Tyrell cut in as he approached. Like the rest, he was covered in blood and sweat. Some men saw the king being assisted from the room by the queen and his mother. They headed towards the kitchen. Lord Randall cursed 7 hells. They must have gone into hiding. He rounded on the room. I want this castle searched from top to bottom, he barked. Right now there is no greater priority than to find the king and queen. And Lady Caitlin. Brian interjected doggedly. Tully glowered at her, but he nodded all the same. And Lady Caitlin. He added. Laura's Tyrell came running over. His handsome feature mired by dirt and blood. A man just told me that he saw them go that way. He pointed at an exit. At an unspoken command, the small group raced through the small doorway and down a passage. Within moments they had arrived at a small kitchen. The scene was one of utter devastation. There were many bodies strewn about, blood mingled on the floor with wine and ale. Body parts, including severed hands and even a head or two, were scattered around the room. Suddenly there was movement at the far corner of the small chamber. Gods be good! Someone uttered in horror. A figure, clothed in blooded armor, stirred from where he sat on an upright barrel. He'd been so still that everyone had assumed he'd been one of the corpses. The figure straightened from his position, then slumped forward, hunched over the sword that supported his weight. Took your bloody time, didn't you? The group rushed forward. Over the Blackfish's shoulder Brian could see that the figure was a grizzled old warrior. Hard and fierce. She didn't know him nor recognize the tree motif etched into his armor. Lord Forrester, the Blackfish said, kneeling to look at the man. Sir Brynden, came the reply, glad you could make it. We're looking for the King and Queen. Garland asked him hurriedly, not sharing Sir Bryndon's concern for their injured ally. Then you've come to the right place, Forrester said. He lifted a weary arm to point at a small storeroom door a short distance from him. The King, Queen and Lady Caitlin are in there. Loras and Garland ran past the seated knight and started to hammer at the door. Try as they might, the door wouldn't give. Loras started shouting to the occupants to let them in, telling them that help had arrived. Brian could hear a hushed voice speaking from the room. By the gods, girl! Loras shouted, almost frantic. Open the door. It might help if you identified yourself. The Blackfish noted as he rose from his kneeling position on the floor. He pushed past the knight and called through the door. Who are you, girl? A slight pause. Then a voice stated a reply, too quiet for Brian to hear. Brynden smiled slightly. Cats, it's your uncle. He shouted, it's over, we have the castle. Open the damn door. They could hear movement as obstacles were hastily removed from behind the door. Randil Tali turned to a soldier nearby. Find a maester or healer. One we brought with us or who were part of the King's party. I want no Free or Bolton anywhere near the King or Queen. The soldier nodded and ran off. For an agonizing moment the door remained closed with only the sounds of frantic movement as the remaining debris was cleared from the other side. Then it opened slowly. Brian saw a young girl standing there tentatively looking out from the darkly lit space within. Brian saw the Blackfish had put a hand on both of the Queen's brothers, keeping them from rushing the door. Gently, he whispered. Lord Forrester turned from where he was sitting. It's all right, Myra, he called, these are friends of mine. The girl nodded and opened the door the full way. We're all right. But please, she entreated through teary eyes. Help the King. A jangle of Maester's chains could be heard as if in answer to the girl's plea. Maester Lewin was ushered into the room and made straight for the doorway. The man looked tired and disheveled, but there was steely look of determination on his face. Out of my way, he commanded the soldiers, who obediently stood aside and let the old man past. Suddenly a snarling sound made the group turn. Growling, a wolf entered the kitchen. Its snout and face matted with blood and gore, its fur tousled, its eyes wild. The creature observed the group of warriors and crouched, gathering itself to spring. Seven hells! Randil Tali muttered under its breath. The wolf bounded across the floor to the open door, ignoring the men that scrambled to get out of its way. Without a second's hesitation the wolf squeezed past and entered the small space headed for the King's prone form. Through the newly created gap Brian could see that the King lay with his head in the lap of Queen Margaery, whose face could not be seen through the long curls that hung from her head. Lady Caitlin was not far away, her hands held blood-soaked cloths that had been used as makeshift bandages. Brian's mistress turned her head towards the intruder. Away, Grey whined, away. The wolf whined pitifully and refused to move. It hunkered close to the King's face, nuzzling his face with its snout. Grey whined. Maester Lewin shouted at the wolf's back. He moved behind the animal, attempting to get past him. In an instant the creature rounded on the old man, snarling furiously. Instinctively the men outside the storeroom recoiled at the sight of the massive beast threatening them. Some raised their swords. Can they not see that he just wants to protect his master? To his credit, Lewin did not retreat, he stayed where he was, looking urgently past the wolf. Grey whined. A voice said firmly. The wolf turned back towards the recesses of the storeroom. It took Brian a moment to realize that it was the Queen that had spoken. The woman was looking up directly into the wolf's huge face. They stared at one another, the Queen's red-ringed eyes looked straight into the golden orbs of the King's protector. Now that she had Grey whined's attention, Margaery offered a small smile. Grey whined, you must move. Robb needs help and people cannot get close. Grey whined cast his head over his shoulder to look out at the group clustered around the doorway. He looked back at Margaery, who nodded towards the exit. With a lingering glance down towards his master, the creature allowed Myra Forrester to lead it from the room, though it constantly looked back at the King on the floor. As soon as the wolf was clear, Maester Lewin entered the room, quickly kneeling by the King. The maester's chains jingled as he deftly examined Robb Stark's injuries. He looked up briefly at Lady Catelyn and Queen Margaery. "We're fine," Catelyn Stark said in answer to the questioning look. "Just bumps and bruises. It's Robb who took all the wounds." Lewyn nodded and returned to his work. Collectively, the group outside held their breath, waiting for the maester to make a judgment. Even the Queen and Lady Catelyn looked forlornly between the king and the maester as he went about his business. After a long moment Lewyn looked up. Tears came from the corners of his eyes as he looked at the Queen and Catelyn Stark. When he spoke the room was so quiet that his words could be heard by everyone present. "There is a chance, Your Grace. But we must act quickly." The maester turned to Brynden Tully. "I need men to carry the king. He must be taken straight to his chambers. I need all my medicines to be taken to his room." The old man quickly got to his feet, his speed belying his age. "Furthermore, I will need access to the maester of the twins' storeroom. He will have access to supplies I may need." "They are yours, maester," the Blackfish stated, looking at his men who hurried to carry out his instructions. "Maester Brynnet has been taken into custody along with the rest of the Free servants. But you'll have access to anything the castle has to offer." Lewyn nodded as men arrived to carry the king away. They gently lifted him onto a makeshift stretcher hastily made out of wooden poles and sheets of fabric. Reluctantly the king's wife and mother moved aside and allowed the king to be moved gently onto the stretcher. Quickly, but with excruciating care, the men lifted the king and made their way through the doorway and out of the room, all under the careful eye of Maester Lewyn. Queen Margaery was close by, holding one of Robb's hand in her own. Her brothers fell in behind Queen Greywine padded after them, growling angrily. Lady Catelyn gathered herself and left the storeroom intent on following. Brian made to fall in behind her when her mistress turned to address her. "Brian." Catelyn's voice was tired and haggard, conveying the depths of her pain. "My lady." Brian stepped in close. "Say what you wish and I will make it so. If I can. I want to thank you for your service tonight. No one could have done better than you did." Brian stiffened. "I should have done more, my lady. I should have seen what?" Lady Catelyn waved her hand, cutting Brian off mid-sentence. "No more, please. There will be time enough for recriminations later." She could do nothing but nod by way of reply. Catelyn looked briefly towards the exit, obviously eager to follow her son. She turned back to Brian. "I must go, but I would like word of my brother Ed Muir. I didn't notice him with the others." Brian hesitated. "I do not know where Lord Ed Muir is, my lady. No one mentioned him in the hall. But I promise I will find out." Catelyn nodded, distracted. "Thank you. I'll be up in the king's chambers." She offered Brian a slight smile, false against her tears and fatigue, before she stepped back and hurried after the procession of soldiers. Brian watched her for a moment. Then she straightened up and marched towards Brynden Tully and Randyll Tarly, who stood talking to Lord Forrester. The man still sat on the upturned barrel being tended to by his daughter, who was attempting to stop the flow of blood from a cut to the warrior's cheek. "Others take me, girl. Leave me here, your place is with the Queen." The girl frowned determinedly. "In a minute, father, I just have to stop the blood." Lord Forrester gripped her hands that held the cloth. "By the gods, Myra. I'm fine." Myra attempted to shake her hands free, there were tears in her eyes. "You're not fine, you've been hurt. Mother will." Lord Forrester leaned forward until he looked into the girl's eyes. "Myra, I promise I am fine. Just tired. Now go, the Queen needs you." The Queen's handmaiden looked at her father. She nodded, angrily wiping away her tears. She seemed to see movement over Brian's shoulder and then gasped. "Rodrik." Brian moved to the side as an armored knight strode through the room, a dented helm thrust under one arm. His armor was covered in dirt and grime, and there were scratches, both large and small, covering the metal surface. "Rodrik," Gregor Forrester said by way of greeting to his son. He attempted to stand, but the weight of his armor mixed with fatigue kept him pinned to his seat. "How are you, boy?" "Better than you, it seems, father," Rodrik replied, smiling slightly at his sire. The knight held up a hand to deter Myra from hugging him. He shook his head to stay her as he turned to Lord Randall and Sir Bryndon. "My lord," Roderick said, bowing his head. "We've secured the camp. Those Bolton and Free men that survived and didn't flee have been rounded up and disarmed." "Good." Randall Tarly nodded grimly. "They'll be made to face the king's justice, come the morrow." "How is the king?" Roderick asked. "Injured, but he may yet survive," Tarly stated, matter-of-factly. "He took a great number of wounds." "There is still hope," Sir Bryndon interjected. "Maester Lewin had known the king since the day the young wolf came into this world. He will not allow him to die if he has anything to say about it." Still the old soldier sighed. "It would have been a damn sight worse if your men hadn't arrived when they did." Tarly took the comment with an air of detachment. "I suspect Lady Olenna will feel differently. Her granddaughter was almost killed." He looked back into the now empty store cupboard, noted the congealing pool of blood on the floor. "We should have been here faster." "No time for that now," Sir Bryndon declared. "There will be plenty of time for blame later." He addressed the young warrior. "Roderick, who's in charge of the camps?" "Harry on Carstark." Roderick replied instantly. "He's supervising herding the Free and Bolton men into several small encampments to keep them apart and to minimize any struggles." "He has enough men?" Randall Tarly asked pointedly. "For the moment," Roderick answered. "The traitors had less men than us to start off with. It's only because they caught us by surprise that they were able to offer any fight at all. Bastards were well prepared." Bryndon seethed, slamming a fist onto one of the many kitchen tables. "This treachery is—" "As you have said," Lord Randall cut in, "there will be plenty of time to go over the events of tonight. The priority now is to contain the traitors while the healers see to the wounded." "Excuse me, my lord." Brian stepped forward, drawing the surprised glances of the men present. "Lady Caitlin has asked me to ascertain the whereabouts of her brother, Lord Edmure." Lord Tarly looked at her. "Lady Brian, here again. I'd have thought you'd have been with your mistress. Are you not her sworn shield?" This last was said with a measure of contempt. "I would be, my lord," Brian replied, "were it not for Lady Caitlin's task to search for her brother." Lord Tarly rolled his eyes. "Absurd, to have a woman in the middle of all this." "Tarly!" the Blackfish exclaimed sharply. "None of that now. She has more than proved herself." He regarded Brian appreciatively. "I think you owe Lady Brian here an apology." "It's Brian. Simply Brian." The Lord of Hornhill sniffed as he eyed the knight. "Apology? For what?" The knight smiled grimly, though his eyes were haunted. "For the fact that, were it not for this woman, we'd be readying a lot more of our friends for burial." "Yes, yes," Randall Tarly said, clearly with his mind elsewhere. "A wonderful job. Now, you were looking for Lady Caitlin's brother." "I sent men to his chambers as soon as we entered the castle. They had orders to find Lord Edmure and secure both him and his free wife until I ordered otherwise. I suspect they are still there." "Thank you, my lord." Brian nodded brusquely and walked away. "I will not stand there idle while I have a job to do." Over her shoulder she heard Roderick Forrester exclaim loudly. "This is your work, father. Others take me, there must be at least 10 dead men here." "It was an uneven fight," came the reply, though it was more a grunt as Lord Forrester was helped to his feet. "Bastards should have brought more than a couple of men." Asking directions from the multitudes of soldiers that thronged the castle. Each one regarding her with the same look of surprise, and not a little confusion and disgust. Brian made her way to the upper levels of the castle. She quickly walked down a narrow passageway until she approached the chambers set aside for the Lord of Riverrun's wedding night. Brian grew concerned as she neared the doors. "Where are the sentries?" she fretted as she got closer to the entrance. "There should be guards." The door suddenly wrenched open and a knight stepped through, the torchlight reflecting off his polished armor. Judging by the heavy plate mail, Brian reckoned him to be a man of the Reach, but she couldn't determine which house he belonged to. The sigil on his armor was obscured by a thick cloak. The man saw Brian and reached for his sword. The next second the steel was out of its scabbard, the smooth metal caught the light, making the sword gleam ominously. Halt. Who goes there? Brian stopped herself a few short steps away from the man, her own hand lightly gripping a sword she had appropriated during the struggle in the hall. I am Brian of Tarth. Sworn shield to Lady Caitlin. The man's eyes narrowed until they were mere slits. Prove it. He insisted. I have no time for this. I serve Lady Stark, sir. You will stand aside of your own accord or I will make you. At the threat the man moved his sword into a ready stance, the movements broadcasting that the man was a born soldier. As he moved to bring his sword to bear, Brian glimpsed the sigil of the man's house. A tower with a torch at the top. House High Tower. Hold. Brian took a step back. Lord Hightower. The man paused, looking at her curiously. You speak of my father. I am his son, Sir Garth. Garth Greysteel. You are commanded by Randall Tully. Sir Garth offered the smallest of nods. I am. Brian sighed in relief but kept her sword up. He could easily be lying. I serve Lady Caitlin, the king's mother. I know who Caitlin Stark is. The man said angrily, his grip on his sword tightening. And I know who you are, Brian of Tarth. I saw you defeat Sir Loras at the tournament at Bitterbridge. Be that as it may, what proof have I that you serve Lady Caitlin now? She looked at the man who was staring at her intently. I must decide what to do. Quickly. Brian lowered her weapon. I have no proof, sir. You will just have to trust me. The knight snorted. Trust is in short supply at the Twins tonight. Small wonder why. She nodded. Even so, sir. I swear by the old gods and the new that I mean no harm to loyal followers of the king and queen. Sir Garth considered for a moment. Slowly, he lowered his own weapon. Very well, Lady Brian. I will trust you for now. Tell me, what do you want? Well, that's as much as I could hope for given the circumstances. Thank you, Sir Garth. I was sent by Lady Stark to seek out her brother. All the fight and posturing seemed to go out of the knight in front of her. He sagged against the wall as he sheathed his sword, slamming the blade home in anger. You're too late, he said mournfully. She felt her blood run cold. Too late, she repeated. Sir Garth nodded. We were all too late. He gestured to the chamber behind him. Turning on his heel, he walked through the doorway and into the room. Brian practically ran after him. She was right behind Sir Garth as they entered the bedchamber. Inside were 4 guards who stood watch over the canopied bed, each one looking as grief-stricken as the last. As they entered the room, all 4 soldiers drew their weapons in quick succession and rounded on Brian, anger and suspicion clouding their eyes. All right, lads, Sir Garth said, his hands upturned. This lady here serves Caitlin Stark. Fuck me, one of the men muttered under his breath. Then, slowly, the men sheathed their weapons. None of that now, Garth Hightower reprimanded as he stepped aside, allowing Brian to step further into the room. It was then that Brian saw the bodies. They were scattered all round the room. She counted 5 in all. Each one wore light armor and the sigils of House Greyjoy. But then Brian realized there was more. In the center of the room, laid on the bed, was a shrouded figure. The dimming light from the hearth fire cast a gloomy air on the scene. The Frizz must have smuggled the Ironborn up here during the feast, Sir Garth offered. They kept the revelers back and allowed the assassins into the room. He looked at the shrouded figure. Lord Edmure never had a chance. With a lump in her throat, Brian knelt at the end of the bed close to the head of the figure. Delicately she pulled back the shroud until she could see all of the face. Lord Edmure's expression was so peaceful he might have been sleeping. His eyes were closed and there was no hint of violence on his features. Steeling herself, Brian lifted the shroud higher and saw that, below the neck there were multiple wounds of various shapes and sizes. The Ironborn filled him with so many holes he might as well have been a block of cheese. Slowly, Brian lowered the blanket that served to cover the former Lord of Riverrun. She stood looking out past the window. She swallowed, lost in her own thoughts. Lady Caitlin will be devastated. Her husband is missing, her son is wounded, her brother dead. So much tragedy to befall one family. If it's of any comfort to Lady Caitlin, it looks as if her brother put up one hell of a fight. Sagarth noted. Bastards hoped to surprise him, but it looks as if he saw them coming. Broke one of their arms and beat another senseless. He swung around the room, his face a grim mask. But he was unarmed and unarmored. Of course he was, it was his wedding night. Sagarth gestured at the bodies around the room. When we arrived, Lord Edmure was already dead and his killers about to rape the girl. He smiled in satisfaction. We were on them before they knew what hit them. We dealt with them and then put Lord Edmure on the bed. We covered him out of respect. Poor bastard was naked. One of the men whispered, earning himself a dark glance from Sagarth. Brian nodded, sighing deeply. Where is Lady Roslin? One of the other men stood forward. Beg pardon my lady, but the free bitch is being held in a chamber next to this one. To await the king's judgment. It may be a while before the king is able to pass judgment on anyone. Brian nodded. You've done well, sirs. Lord Edmure's death is no reflection on you. I will be sure to tell Lady Caitlin and Lord Randil. The fault lies with the Freys and the Greyjoys. Not with you. Very kind, my lady. Sagarth said, unable to hide the relief in his voice. Brian looked down on the figure. Be sure that you stand watch over Lord Edmure until someone comes to collect him. She looked up. Also I charge you to make sure that nothing befalls Lady Roslin. If there is to be action taken upon her, then it is for the king to do so. Sagarth understood her meaning. He nodded his head. It will be as you say, my lady. It's Brian. The woman said. Though it seemed so unimportant now. Simply Brian. Brian walked behind Queen Margaery as she strode purposefully through the corridors of the twins. She was surrounded by guards, handpicked by Lord Randil. Foremost among them was Sir Garland, who walked very close to his sister. The knight was fully armored, his hand gripped the hilt of the sheathed sword at his hip. The Tyrells are taking no chances. Can't say I blame them. The queen had bathed and her hair had been rebraided. She had dressed in a clean dress of blue silk. Nothing gaudy or colorful, but still regal. Brian was no judge of fashion, but she thought the subtle coloring of the queen's garments suited both her and reflected the events of the last few days. She had not thought to find herself escorting the queen. Indeed, it had been a surprise when Catelyn Stark, still overwhelmed with grief at the loss of her brother, had summoned her. Security around the royal chambers was strict. Each door was guarded by a multitude of guards, each refusing her entry. If it weren't for Sir Brynden seeing her and ordering the men to let her past, she doubted she would have been allowed entry to the king's bedchamber. Looking at Sir Brynden in the early morning light, Brian was shocked by how old the man appeared. He looked as if he has aged a decade since I saw him last night. The death of his brother's son lies heavy upon him. She had found her mistress sitting alone by the king's bedside. This had been a surprise in itself. All through the night the king's wife and mother had fought an unspoken war with each over the right to tend to Robb Stark. Neither had left his side nor attended to other things. It had taken Maester Lewin to point out that he needed to examine the queen's unborn babe to finally convince her to leave her husband's bedside. Right now the queen was in an adjoining room being subjected to a close examination by Maester Lewin. Brian could hear the queen asking quiet questions, concern in her voice. She could not hear the Maester's replies, but the tone sounded reassuring. Catelyn Stark had the appearance of a woman who was trying to maintain her dignity even though the world had turned against her. She sat at her son's side, holding his hand, her eyes moist, her expression vacant. Brian, I want you to guard the queen. Stay with her and protect her as you have me. Brian started. No. Not her. Not Renlys intended. My lady. I am your sworn shield. Please, it is my duty to protect you. Catelyn stiffened and looked up at her with blank eyes. Your duty is whatever I decide it is. Margaery is my good daughter and carries my grandchild. The woman looked down at her son and stifled a sob. I can do nothing for Robb at the moment, but I can make sure his wife and child are protected. The queen will have plenty of protectors. Brian argued. Gods be good. Please don't make me watch over the woman who should have been Renlys' bride. And she will have one more. Catelyn stated firmly, her eyes hardening. I have spoken to the queen and she has agreed. She was most impressed with your conduct in the hall. 7. Save me. The bitch has forgotten all about Renly Baratheon now that she has another king in her grasp. Catelyn Stark's face softened. Please Brian, do this, for me. Brian could do nothing but bow in obedience. Now she walked next to the queen as they entered the main hall of the twins. Some of the guards were left outside, but a great multitude escorted the queen into the large space that had, so recently, been the stage of a great fight. There was no evidence of the fight that had taken place so recently before. Brian had expected the corpses to be gone, of course, but the floor had been cleared of debris and blood. The tables righted and set on a rough circle as a meeting of the full council was in session. The lords were in the middle of a massive argument. Men were yelling at each other, shouting and cursing to make themselves heard over their fellows. Faces were red and spit flew from mouth as the quarrels raged. Several hands were on daggers. It will not take much for this to spill into open violence. They are scared and in shock over what happened. Brian could see that the room had split into factions. The Northmen on one side, the Riverlanders on the other. Small wonder, the Northmen came south to save their allies and they were betrayed in the lands of a man who was supposed to be their friend. If Roose Bolton hadn't also proved to be false, then violence may already have erupted. As it was, both sides had lost people. The men of the Reach stood to one side, not engaging with the arguments raging across the hall. The hollering that had preceded their arrival went quiet as the queen entered. Few present had expected Margaery to be there, and some looked questioningly at the queen as she made her way to the dais. She paused as she inspected the vacant high seat of the twins, her face conflicted with emotion. Then, decided, she briefly made a show of dusting off the seat before sitting gracefully into the chair, setting her back against the firm wood. A wry chuckle went up which the queen did nothing to stop. Brian climbed the steps to the dais and came to stand by the side of the chair. She surveyed the room. No obvious threat here, but still one can never be too careful. She glanced up at the balcony overlooking the dais. It was empty. My lords, the queen said clearly. This council is now in session. The room exploded as a multitude of voices, each one trying to make themselves heard. This went on for a minute. Brian glanced at the queen, who seemed content to allow her husband's bannermen to argue things out. However, as the lords showed no sign of abating their arguments and the volume of their voices rose higher and higher, the queen turned towards Randyll Tarly, who stood at the foot of the dais off to one side. She nodded at the general. Quiet. All of you. A voice able to be heard on the battlefield is quite a boon. The clamor instantly ceased. The room quietened as lords began to take their seats at the numerous tables. Some shot angry glances at Lord Tarly, but he paid them no heed. Within moments everyone was calm and they looked expectantly at the queen. Margaery gripped the handrest of her chair tightly. She took a deep breath to steady herself, an action that would have gone unnoticed by the whole, but one that Brian, being so close, observed. So the queen is not as confident as she would like us to think. Though I don't fault her for that, her husband lies between life and death upstairs. My lords, the queen said, tightly. The events of the last few days have taken a great toll on all of us. We have lost friends, we have lost family. At this the queen's voice wavered slightly, she bit her bottom lip before carrying on. However, we will pick ourselves up from this tragedy and rise again to punish those responsible. How is the king? Someone shouted from the back of the room. Brian could not discern who had spoken. The king is resting from his wounds. Margaery answered. The Maester is hopeful that he will soon recover. Brian glanced at the queen. That's not what I heard Lewyn say when I was stood watch outside chamber. It's incredibly doubtful that he will ever wake from the stupor he's in. When do we execute the phrase? Another man cried out. When do we punish the treasonous bastards? A clamor went up from the room. The queen raised a hand for silence. This time Lord Tarly's harsh voice was not needed to stay the noise. As soon as the room went silent, the queen spoke again. I feel as you do, my lords. My husband lies injured as the result of the actions of these traitors. I promise you. She looked around the room. I promise all of you that justice will be done. A murmur rippled through the hall. Margaery turned to Lord Randyll and spoke before other questions could be asked. What is your report on our position, Lord Tarly? The man offered a slight bow to the queen. Your grace, the twins and the surrounding lands are ours. The Free and Bolton forces have been beaten, either taken captive or killed in the fight. Maester Lewin stepped to the dais. We spoke about this earlier, your grace, but I can now report that it was Lord Frey's body that was found near the kennels. We have had a number of his relatives confirm the corpse's identity. The old man shuddered. It was hard to make an identification by the time the king's direwolf was finished with him. A grim cheer went up. The celebration did not surprise Brian. Whatever the wolf did to him would have been a blessing compared to the old man's fate if the men here had gotten to him. Our own casualties? Margaery asked, when the cheer died down. Still being counted, your grace. Randyll Tarly said clearly. The battle occurred on both sides of the river and some of the bodies have been washed downstream. However, we suspect that hundreds paid the price for the Free treachery. Have we found the traitors? The ones who escaped the battle, I mean. Lord Forrester spoke from his place on the foremost Northerners' table. We have received word from both Seaguard and Greywater Watch. Both have men out to the east and west looking for stragglers. They have orders to take the traitors alive but to kill if necessary. The ground rumbled in assent. Some no doubt would prefer to do the killing themselves. However, Lord Forrester said, laying a hand on Harry on Karstark's shoulder. Lord Reed has confirmed that his Crannogmen have found the bodies of Lord Rickard Karstark and Lady Mage Mormont. They, and their entourage, were ambushed by Bolton men as they entered the neck. There were no survivors. The Queen grit her teeth, her knuckles whitened. She looked sympathetically at Harry on Karstark, who looked stoically back at her with dead eyes. Her expression reflected her anger. And Roose Bolton? What news have we of him? Gregor Forrester looked unhappy. Lord Reed reports that he joined up with the men who murdered Lord Rickard and Lady Mage. They have headed east, towards the Vale. I want him caught. Margaery declared. Send as many men as can be spared to hunt them down like the dogs they are. The lords nodded appreciatively. It has already been ordered. Sir Brynden Tully said as he stepped forward. Lord Reed has closed the neck and given assurances that no Free or Bolton man will escape that way. Unfortunately, the old knight hesitated. There has been no sign of the Kingslayer or the highborn Lannister hostages that escaped with him. Our riders are out in force, but they are stretched thin looking for Bolton, Free and Lannister fugitives over such a large area. The Queen looked exasperated. Jaime Lannister cannot have gotten far. He can only be a few hours ahead of us. We have questioned the men responsible for releasing the Kingslayer. Sir Brynden said. As your grace will remember, we thought he had escaped during the confusion of the attack. Now though it seems he, and the men with him, were released quite some time before. There were dark mutterings and curses from the hall. Despite all this, the Blackfish said, we would do well to remember that the number of our dead would have been a great deal worse if Lord Tarly and our northern forces from Harrenhal hadn't arrived when they did. A chorus of agreement went up around the room. Brian admired the Blackfish's strategy. He's pointing out that they would have lost more, if not been totally destroyed, had they not been saved by other, true allies. Well said, Sir Brynden. Margaery declared. While the treachery of some has cost us dear, let us remember that the actions of friends, through the bonds of fellowship, won the day. But at what cost? Sir Willis Marndaly asked angrily. His face red. Brian recalled he had lost a brother during the struggle. She had seen the man slain by crossbow bolts before he could even take up arms against his attackers. Anger rippled across the room. Men shouted in agreement, banging their fists on the table. Quiet. This time it was Sir Brynden who had spoken, anger making his face go red. Are we a pack of dogs or soldiers? The Queen nodded gratefully at the Riverlander. You are correct, Sir Willis. Many have died who should not have done. Taken by the actions of traitors. Your Grace speaks truly, but what does she intend to do now? Daisy Mormont asked from her seat. The woman of Bear Island sat with her arm in a sling, her face white from pain and exertion. There was also grief there, having received news that morning that her mother had been slain. Surely it is for the king to determine our next move. A lord interjected from the back of the hall. In the king's absence the queen rules. Daisy spoke up. A knight stood. Beg pardon your grace, but given the circumstances, wouldn't it be best for us to wait for the king to recover? Nonsense. Harry on Karstark shouted. We're at war. We have been attacked. We can't wait around for it to happen again. Besides, we must have vengeance. A Riverlander shouted, we lost our liege lord. Another man cried in anger and grief, I lost my son. The phrase must be exterminated for this low treachery. The whole descended into chaos. Men were in their feet again, shouting at or over each other. Brian saw the glimpse of steel as daggers were drawn from their sheaths. Instinctively she moved closer to the queen. She observed Garlan and Loras Tyrell nearby with their hands on their sword hilts take a few steps nearer to their sister. Enough. The Blackfish stood at one of the foremost tables, slamming his gauntlet fist onto a table with such force the entire length shook with the impact. The whole stilled. Men paused in mid-speech. The grizzled soldier looked over the crowd. We will not descend into anarchy in front of our queen. He snarled. Is she still our queen? Even now? If the king dies, then she's nothing. The kingdom will fall. A gasp went up from the assembly. Brian fought to keep her mouth from opening in shock. The words had come from the group of lords, but she could not make out who had uttered them. Sir Brynden Tully looked the group over with contempt. He looked ready to wade into the crowd with his broadsword. Under his intense gaze some men looked down, browbeaten, shamed by the anger they had invoked in the renowned old knight. The Queen. The Blackfish rumbled. Is the Queen, no matter what may befall the king. We all swore oaths to obey them, and by the 7 we will abide by those oaths. Sir Brynden fought for calm within himself. In any case, King Robb will not die. Do I make myself clear to you all? Randil Tarly came to stand near the Blackfish, a tacit show of support. Faced with the 2 legendary soldiers, the crowd grew silent again. Queen Margaery coughed. I think it best that we take a break. I will reconvene this council at nightfall, my lords. Go, let the fresh air clear your heads. Slowly the lords dispersed. A few minutes later the hall was empty bar the Queen, her protectors, Mayor Stillowin, the Blackfish and Lords Karstark and Tully. No, not all. Lord Forrester remained sat at the table. He had made no move to leave. Neither had Lord Bracken, who stood near the rear tables as if uncertain whether to approach. Damn them to all 7 hells. The Blackfish swore loudly. Bad enough to have to deal with traitors, but to have our supposedly loyal men cast aspersions on the legitimacy of the Queen's rule is beyond the pale. Whoever it was who said that had a point. Margaery said calmly. She drummed her fingers on the armrests. If the king dies, am I still queen? At their looks of surprise she smiled grimly. Come my lords, I am only saying what we're all thinking. Mayor Stillowin stepped forward. The law of succession is clear, your grace. The king has acknowledged that you are carrying his child. That child will follow him as the new sovereign. I am pregnant, Mayor Stillowin. Margaery said, lost in thought. I have no child as yet. It matters not to the north, your grace. Gregor Forrester rose from his seat. You are Robb Stark's queen. The baby you carry is a Stark of Winterfell, the grandson of Eddard Stark. The north remembers. We will follow you before and after the childbirth. The queen looked at Harryon. Do you believe this to be true, Lord Karstark? The young lording's face was stricken with grief, but his eyes were clear as he regarded the queen. Undoubtedly, your grace. We took Robb Stark as our king. Northern honor demands we support his queen, and his child. I know the Mardaelis, Mormonts and Umbers will do likewise. Margaery nodded slowly. She titled her head at the man in front of her. Some Northerners take their oaths more seriously than others, it would seem. Lord Karstark hawked and spat. The Boltons have always been bastards, your grace. True, we never expected them to commit treason of this sort, but they've always coveted the Starks' position. If Bolton escapes back north, he'll link with his son. Brynden noted. The Boltons have enough men north of Moat Cailin to fight any loyal houses. Most of whom have been depleted by sending their forces south and weakened by fighting the Ironborn. I have dispatched ravens to every castle and hold fast in the north, your grace, warning them of the Boltons' treachery. Our forces will not be caught by surprise again. It's true the fighting has cost the north, your grace. Harryon looked defiant. but I swear there are enough northern houses with sufficient men who are loyal to the Starks to make them pay for what they've done. Thank you, Lord Karstark. Margaery said kindly. I cannot imagine your loss. I know my husband would wish to confer the lordship of Karhold on you officially himself, but, if you'll allow, I'll do it myself tonight after the council meets again. I would ask you to gather as many of your men to witness it. It would be an honor, your grace. Harryon declared, bowing to the queen. Good. Margaery said, looking to Harryon's side. What of you, Sir Brynden? Will you condescend to having Riverrun bestowed on you by a woman? The knight started, looking upwards in surprise. Your grace. Surely the lordship goes to Catelyn as hostess' eldest child. Ideally. Margaery said in a thoughtful tone. But Lady Catelyn has refused. She is already Lady of Winterfell and cannot administer to Riverrun. Then it falls to Lysa. Sir Brynden said plainly, though not without an amount of hesitation in his voice. The queen gave him a knowing glance. You know as well as I, Sir Brynden, that Lysa Arryn cannot be allowed to take control of the Riverlands. She has already shown that she is of doubtful loyalty by refusing to involve the Vale in the war. If she had, this war would have been ended by now. Nevertheless, Sir Brynden said doggedly, it is her right if Cat refuses. Family, duty, honor. You should remember the ordering of those words, your grace. I respect your loyalty, Sir Brynden. Margaery said. And your love of family. I would suggest that we appoint you as regent of the Riverlands until the war is concluded. Then we can resolve the issue of succession. The Blackfish looked stricken. He had not thought he would ever be asked to rule. He looks more ill at ease with this than he did when he stormed the main hall. Eventually, under the queen's intense gaze, the knight nodded slowly. I will consent for the time being. Due to the war. Excellent, Sir Brynden. Margaery said in relief, her first real smile of the day, small though it was, coming across her face. Now we have a lot to discuss before the meeting tonight, I suggest. Pardon, your grace. Everyone's head went up as Lord Bracken approached the dais. Lord Bracken? The queen asked cautiously. The man bowed deeply. Your grace. I would ask a question if I might. You may. The queen said slowly. Lord Bracken straightened and looked unblinkingly at the queen. There is a lot of talk, rumors even, regarding how Lord Tarly was able to be at the twins. Brian had seen Margaery's eyes narrow in anger at the mention of rumors. Forgive me, your grace. Lord Bracken said, but the arrival of allies at such a time seems awfully coincidental. One would think you'd be grateful for the help. Sir Brynden noted sourly. Bracken did not back down. I would simply ask how Lord Tarly and his men happened to be there when they did. Last we heard, he and his men were besieging Casterly Rock and then they happened to be at the twins. Do you have an accusation, my lord? Garland Tyrell asked, his tone harsh, his face white. Not at all. Lord Bracken stated clearly, his eyes going wide. Only that the timing is suspect. It was almost as if you knew what the phrase intended. We did. The hall went quiet. No one spoke. You knew of the attack. Bracken's face went red with rage and shock, his hand went for his sword. Brian made ready in case he charged the dais. You knew and did nothing. Easy, Janos, Brynden said, stepping forward to put himself between Lord Randall and the angry man in front of him. Randall Tarly looked completely unconcerned with the threat of imminent violence. The Queen looked from Lord Randall to Janos Bracken. My lord, forgive Lord Tarly, he speaks with the blunt simplicity of a soldier. Lord Bracken's mouth hung open in shock, there were tears in his eyes. Men died because you delayed. Because of your games. Your cowardice. Withdraw that, my lord. Loras Tyrell cried, his sword suddenly in hand, his face the deepest shade of crimson. Enough. Margaery Tyrell declared, coming to stand next to the Blackfish. There is no need of this. Lord Bracken, please allow me to explain. The Riverlander swallowed. Please do, your grace. He eyed Randall Tarly with contempt. It is true that the Tyrells were aware of the Frey's intentions. Margaery said. My grandmother Lady Olenna had written to Lord Tarly, informing him of the plot and ordering him to intercede. Gods be good. Bracken breathed. But Margary went on. By the time Lord Tarley had written to us we had already left for the Twins. Free and Bolton men were acting as scouts along our journey. We suspect they kept riders and ravens away from the main column so that no one could be informed. And of course, when we arrived under their roof all communication was controlled by our enemies. We had no choice but to march a small force east. To come ourselves. Lord Randall spoke. He seemed untroubled by the tension in the room. I left my son in charge of the siege at Casterly Rock and struck east as fast as we could. By rights I should have stopped to arrest the Freys stationed at Ashmark, but there wasn't time. We'll deal with them soon enough, Sir Bryndon declared. Tarley nodded sternly. We linked up with Sir Garland and Lord Forrester as they marched north. We impressed upon them the need for speed and raced to the Twins. We were very nearly too late. Gregor Forrester said quietly from his seat. Margary suddenly walked down the few steps to the hall floor. Brian followed her quickly, but the Queen waved her away. The Queen spoke directly to Lord Bracken as she took his hands. I only found this out last night, my lord. My grandmother's spies in the capital found out about the plot but had no way to get a message to us once we left Riverrun. If Lord Tarley hadn't acted as he did we would all have been killed. Same for us, Gregor Forrester noted. We would have walked into a carefully laid Bolton and Free trap and been slaughtered. Bracken looked doubtful, but, after a moment, he nodded. The Queen smiled slightly. Come, my lord. Listen to our plans. As I said earlier, we have much to discuss. Chapter 40, Return. Chapter text. It was time. He stood on his chamber balcony overlooking the castle courtyard. The cold wind tugged at his loose tunic. He found it bracing. More so, it reminded him of home. Below him he could see hundreds of men assembling. They were silent as they formed ranks, slotting into position like a well-oiled machine. Like silent wraiths they stood to attention awaiting orders. He found the quietness of their movements disquieting, the lack of camaraderie oppressive. If this was the North they'd be jesting, swapping bawdy jokes to lift the spirits and ready themselves for the struggles ahead. Each man was clad in armor, their weapons gleamed in the morning light. All of the equipment they carried was pristine, cleaned to exacting standards that were rigorously enforced by their commanders' lieutenants. At an order the men turned and began to march through the castle gateway, under the raised portcullis, their boots creating a plodding rhythm as they marched in unison. The men are disciplined and well trained. He sighed. How many would not be returning to their homes, to their families and loved ones? He left the balcony and entered his bedchamber. It was a small room, hardly fitting a high-born lord of his position and status. Not that he cared about that. Kat was always the one who decorated our rooms. She was always the ascetic one. He walked to his armor, which currently adorned a wooden frame in a corner of the room. He looked it over, inspecting the rivets and contours of the metal. This is not my armor. In the past he would never have worn armor such as this. He was used to the clothing of the North, which was normally free of ornamentation. The castle smiths had been directed to make him a suit of armor that reflected his northern heritage. They had struggled for weeks to fulfill this request, eventually presented the finished work to him. Instantly he had sent it back saying it was too ostentatious. Within days it had been returned only to be sent back once again. So had followed a farcical dance between the creators and the man who would wear their work. I am probably hated down in the forge. They probably think I'm playing a ridiculous game, requesting that they blemish their work by making it more plainer. His new squire had been put in a terrible quandary. The boy was liked and respected by the smith and his apprentices. This relationship had been jeopardized by his needing go back and forth between his master and the smiths, relaying instructions and having to endure the grumbles and mutterings that accompanied each request. The man smiled. A bit of conflict will be good for the boy. He stepped back to get a better look at the finished work. He nodded to himself. It will serve. Though it makes no difference either way, we are out of time. A knock at the door woke him from his thoughts. Enter. His squire entered the room carrying a large item covered in heavy gauze. Morning, lad, what can I do for you? The young man set his package down and stood to attention. I was instructed to help you dress, my lord. He chuckled. Does Arya believe I've forgotten how to do it myself? The squire blushed. No, my lord, she just said that Sansa. Lady Sansa, that is. His master smiled broadly. Relax, boy. Don't let the girls tie you in a knot. The squire went red with embarrassment, a comical look for a boy almost a man and now taller and more muscled than the lord he served. Forgive me, my lord. Stand easy, boy. The lord chuckled, repressing the urge to outright laugh. I see how they are with you. Particularly Arya. My lord. The squire's eyes went wide. I swear to you, on the seven, that I would never. This time he did laugh. It felt good, though it made the squire flinch as if struck. Seeing the reaction, the man walked over to the squire and placed a hand on his shoulder. I know, lad, I know. It's quite all right. The squire swallowed. It's just you've been so good to me, my lord. I would hate to think that you believe I'm not appreciative of your patronage. He patted the boy on the shoulder. I know, lad. I'm glad you came with us from King's Landing. I have seen you work hard the last few months, applying yourself to your training and work. I could not have been prouder. His squire lowered his head to hide the tears that came to his eyes. I'm so grateful, my lord. All I had to look forward to was a life in the Night's Watch. There is no shame in that, lad. The man chided gently. There is great honor in serving the watch. The boy nodded. Even so, my lord, I was never given a choice. I was taken in by Toib Homart when I was young and then he gave me to the Night's Watch. You know why that was, and who's responsible. I do, my lord, and I'm grateful that someone was looking out for me. But I have felt all my life that I didn't have control over what happened to me. That's the case no matter who you are, just ask your father. Until I came here and you took me on as your squire. The boy continued. I've learned things here that I never dreamed I would. I never thought I'd ride a horse or wield a sword. And yet you have. The man noted. You have taken all instruction and completed every task. You should be proud of yourself. It's all thanks to the opportunity you have given me. The boy finished hurriedly as if ending a well-rehearsed speech. So that is why I have this for you. He offered the object he had arrived with to the man before him. I made this for you. He stepped forward and took the gift. Gods, it was heavy. The lord walked to a table beside the wall and set the item down. He gently undid the gauze, unwrapping the gift carefully. Looking at the item, the man felt his breath catch in his throat. You made this. The boy could not see the reaction of his master. He craned his neck to try and gauge the response. Yes, my lord. I have spent my evenings in the forge making it. The older man reached down and lifted the object so that it faced him. He held it in his arms, admiring the boy's work. He rotated the gift so that he could take it all in. I know you detest the ostentation that seems to be part of the blacksmith's work here, but I thought you would appreciate this. Does the blacksmith know you made this? The boy smirked. No, my lord. I worked late into the evening after my lessons. He looked the boy's work over. It's beautiful, Gendry, a true work of art. Thank you. Gendry Waters bowed his head, trying to be dignified, but he was unable to keep a smile of pleasure from spreading across his face. While we're on the subject of gifts, Gendry's master said as he replaced the object on the table. I have one for you. A token of appreciation for your work. It's not necessary, my lord. I decide what is necessary. Come now, Gendry, one good turn deserves another. With this, the man walked over to a trunk beside his bed. The large wooden box was big enough to stretch the entire width of the large piece of furniture. The man pulled open the lid and reached inside. With both arms he lifted his own gift from within the recesses of the container. Gendry gasped as a large warhammer was presented to him. His master held it in both hands as he handed it over to his squire. With wide eyes the boy accepted the gift, looking it over with awe. The man stepped back and closed the lid of his trunk. I cannot claim to have made this weapon myself, but I did have a hand in its design. Why a hammer, my lord? The boy asked, preoccupied with the weapon in his hands. Not to be ungrateful, but why not a sword? He smiled, as he locked the trunk. The master-at-arms tells me you are much more adept with a battle axe than with a sword. Besides, you should have a weapon that best suits your frame. Put the prodigious strength to good use. The boy examined the end of the hammer that was festooned with spikes, admiring the work. He twisted the haft to look at the back, to properly inspect the counterbalance to the hammer's head. He looked closely at the intricate metal work. "Are these antlers, my lord?" It seemed fitting. The man said, turning back to his squire. "More than you know." Gendry hefted the hammer into both hands, drawing the large weapon across his chest, testing the weight and balance. Seeing him standing there, the lord was thrown back 20 years to his best friend who had wielded such a weapon. Such a lot has changed since then. Now, go practice with it. We leave in a few hours and there will not be much opportunity on the road. We have to travel secretly. The boy twisted the hammer until its end rested on the floor. "I still don't understand why we didn't go with the rest of the force." The man sighed. No doubt Arya had spent a great deal of time trying to explain the plan. "We go by a different route than they do. The army serves as a diversion. If our enemies knew what we intended, they would move to stop us. It is imperative that we act secretly, at least for the next few days." Gendry nodded slowly. "As you say, my lord." He looked thoughtful. "Do you need help preparing?" The man looked round the near-empty chamber. "I am ready to leave." "More than ready. I have been trapped here far too long already." Another nod from his squire. "What about your armor, my lord?" "I am to help you get into it." The man's eyes hardened. "I am quite capable of dressing myself." "Even so," Gendry replied determinedly. "What about your leg?" "My leg is fine now," his master replied. "You should have noticed that when I beat you in the tourney yard yesterday." Gendry smiled. There's no malice in the boy. How odd, that he should grow up away from Robert and yet be so much like him. Now go and practice. Tell Arya and Sansa to be ready. I will have no delays come nightfall." His squire nodded. He made to leave and then turned back. He gestured to the far wall of the chamber. "I suppose there's no chance that the blacksmith could examine your sword, my lord? As partial payment for your armor. Just once, before you go." The man's eyes were drawn to the wall. In the center, held by a bracket that supported the blade horizontally, was ice, the ancestral great sword of his house. Eddard Stark smiled. "Is his master not paying enough?" Gendry returned the smile. "To touch and feel a sword made of Valyrian steel is a rare treat for a metal worker. I hear the smith held one once but hasn't for many years. Hearing that there is such a weapon in the castle but out of his reach has been torture for the poor man. I feel sorry for him, my lord." Ned chuckled. "Tell the poor tortured man that he will soon see relief. Tell him that he can see it when we leave. As payment for the adjustments I had him make for my armor." "Thank you, my lord," Gendry said, bowing as he left. Alone, Ned looked at the heirloom on the wall. The ancient blade seemed to call to him, promising him battle and glory. Just as it had twice before when we went to fight a war. Ice was more to him than a sword. It represented House Stark and all that it stood for. The weapon had been present in his life since the day he was born, and one day he hoped it would be taken up by his son. It was a part of his family, like a brother, though a brother of the soul rather than the flesh. He dressed himself in his armor, taking time to make sure the straps were adjusted and everything fit properly. As he set about the task, he reflected on his situation. The plan is a good one, and has a real chance of success. But in order for it to work, events have to transpire exactly as planned. The timing must be precise. As he pulled on his heavy boots, he sighed. "I am not a young man and I have survived 2 wars already, the first of which we were not expected to survive. Am I tempting fate by throwing myself once more into the fray? The last few months has seen me almost be carried off by death several times. Illness and infection has been a constant of mine since I escaped King's Landing." He paused. "Robb is the young wolf, the king in the north. He has done so well, and accomplished so much. He doesn't need my help. He is the rising sun. I am the past, the dying light on the horizon. Or shall the huntsman have one last hunt? Ned shook his head, angry with himself for his melodrama and selfishness. Robb is injured. The North is in open conflict with itself. The situation in the Riverlands is precarious with Edmure Tully dead. Our spies report that Tywin Lannister will march soon, bringing battle to the Riverlands before they are ready, while Robb lies at death's door. His hand made a fist. My family needs me. I will not let them down now. Not when I can help. He finished his work and stood. He turned to regard the great sword. Eddard Stark reached out and took it from the wall. The blade practically sprang into his hands as if it had been waiting for the moment when its owner would call for it. One more war, soul brother. Before the sun sets. Chapter 41, Tyrion 8. Chapter text. She agreed. Yes indeed my lord. The old man said, the surprise evident in his voice. The chains he wore jangled as he moved uneasily from one foot to the other. Tyrion looked at his father's desk. And you've confirmed her acceptance. Your lord father has. Varys declared, stepping forward and nodding deferentially towards the seated figure of Lord Tywin. A messenger from Magister Illyrio Mopethys of Pentos indicates that Daenerys Targaryen sailed from Slavers Bay with all her strength a moon's turn ago, leaving just a small garrison to safeguard her holdings. The eunuch looked smug. With any luck she should be past lies by now. Fuck me. Kevan Lannister spoke from behind his brother's desk. Did Magister Illyrio mention the numbers she brings with her? Pycelle grumbled as he re-examined the piece of parchment in his hands. The message notes that the Queen will have her army of Unsullied numbering around 10,000, 3 mercenary companies that equal approximately 3,000 men, several hundred Dothraki screamers, and 3 dragons. Varys added quietly. Kevan Lannister considered. Combined with our own army, the Golden Company and the Gold Cloaks, that brings our total fighting complement up to 35,000. Though of course we will have to leave the Gold Cloaks here to protect the city. I am aware. Tywin Lannister said. It was the only time he had spoken since the others had entered the Solar. The hand of the king had left it to others to fill the silent void with news of recent events. The king was practically jumping up and down with excitement. Then we'll go on the attack. Tyrion rolled his eyes. I forget at times that he's little more than a child. He thinks it's all so easy. Lord Tywin settled his fingers on his lap, interlocking his fingers as he stared without expression at his grandson. Patience. He said it softly, but with the same commanding voice with which he said everything else. Joffrey was having none of it. Hang patience. With a force that size we can take the Riverlands and reconquer the Westerlands. Tywin tilted his head, but before he could open his mouth to speak, Cersei stepped forward from where she had been standing behind Tyrion. That's the problem with the Hand Solar, no damn chairs. It's almost as if father wants to discourage visitors. You did say that Robb Stark is still injured at the Twins. The enemy has lost its leader. We should strike as soon as Daenerys Targaryen arrives. Her son looked scornfully at her. Typical women's caution. He uttered with disdain. He turned his head towards Lord Tywin. Grandfather, we should command our forces to march north at once. Strike now when the enemy is weak. Tyrion sighed and closed his eyes, willing away the dull throb that marked the beginnings of a headache. Weak. Has the little shit not been paying attention? Added to the discomfort growing in his head was the constant flaring of the agonizing pain in his back. Pycelle had offered him milk of the poppy to help soothe him, but he had not taken the gracious invitation. I need my wits about me. Besides, the old fool probably just wants to stop me taking up his time with my complaints. Gods, it hurts. Tywin Lannister looked from his grandson to his daughter, his expression unreadable. We will take the battle to the Starks, but it's all a matter of timing. The king went red in the face, outraged that his commands were being ignored or, worse, being disobeyed. I will command the men myself if I have to. Tywin looked coldly at him. You will do no such thing. Joffrey's face went an even deeper shade of red. You will do as I command. You are the hand of the king, your role is to obey. I am the king. Deadly silence descended on the chamber. For once Joffrey seemed to realize he had overstepped some unspoken line, but, to Tyrion's surprise, he was unwilling to back down. His grandfather looked at him, keeping his cold eyes locked on the young monarch who was breathing heavily. After a long moment he tilted his head to the side. Pycelle, Varys, leave us. His eyes did not leave Joffrey's face. The two members of the small council made a hasty exit, bowing to the hand and then leaving the room as quickly as they could. Tyrion fidgeted where he stood. Gods, he needed a drink. He looked about for a jug of wine, but the only one to be found was sat on his father's desk, and he wouldn't be approaching that unless absolutely necessary. After a moment the doors to the Solar closed, leaving the Lannister family together. Marvelous, a nice intimate gathering, 3 generations of the immediate family. The only one missing is Jaime, though he should be here within a week if Uncle Kevan is to be believed. Cersei stepped behind her son, putting her hands protectively on his shoulders. Her fingers looked milky white against the fine red fabric of the king's doublet. Like thin white gouges. Joffrey didn't mean to question you, father. He is just concerned is all. We all are. Please, you've been making excuses for him his entire life. Tywin barely stirred. He should learn to control himself. Joffrey reeled as if struck. Control myself? It's you that's been losing this war, grandfather. Your grand scheme involving Walder Free amounted to nothing. The Hand regarded him. Is that what you think? The young king was confused by the tone of the reply. What else is there to think? The Westerlands are gone. Your plot to kill Robb Stark failed. You had your shot and missed. Did I? Tywin asked with a raised eyebrow. You did. Joffrey retorted, his face now as red as his doublet. And now it falls to me to win this war for you. A small smile appeared at the corners of Tywin's mouth. Amusement danced in his eyes. Tyrion shuddered. You're fucked now, Joff. Better you'd kept quiet. Perhaps his grace would be good enough to educate us on what our next step should be. Completely missing the danger, Joffrey took this as evidence of his grandfather's defeat. Little fool. He drew himself up, shrugged his mother's hands from his shoulders and stepped forward. First he declared, I will march the army north to Harrenhal and Riverrun. There are only meager forces there and we can sweep them aside with what we have. Next I'll dispatch a force to keep the Starks pinned down at the Twins. Go on. Tywin's eyes had narrowed so much they had become deadly slits. Next, as soon as Daenerys arrives I'll journey here to marry her. As soon as that's done I'll have her dragons burn Stannis out of Storm's End. The king's eyes danced with joy at the thought. Finally I'll send my new army from Essos down the river road and come at the Tyrell forces around Casterly Rock from behind. I'll have Randil Tarlis head within a moon's turn of the wedding. Joffrey was breathless. Tyrion looked at him from the corner of his eye. Little bastard has given it some thought, I'll give him that, though he's dreaming if he thinks father will ever give him an army. Everyone in the room were looking between Tywin and Joffrey. For a long moment there was no sound but Joffrey's excited breathing. When he finally spoke, Lord Tywin looked bored beyond tears. Thank you for your opinion, Your Grace. I'm sure we'll all the better for it. It took Joffrey a minute to realize that he was being mocked. The king blinked hard and then his face whitened. Do not make a fool of me, old man. I am the king. Tywin abruptly stood and looked down on the young boy who had dared to insult him. Cersei's hand shot to Joffrey's arm as if to clutch him to her, to protect him from what was about to happen. His grace is tired. Tywin said, his eyes piercing Joffrey's. He should be sent to rest. Cersei urgently tugged on her son's arm, attempting to get him to leave the room. The king resisted, pulling his arm back with such force he wrenched it free of his mother's grip with a jerk. Unbalanced, Joffrey stepped awkwardly forward. His fists were clenched by his side, his eyes were dark with malice. I am the king. He repeated. As if father hadn't heard him the first time. Then go. Tywin Lannister replied. Muster the forces and see who is foolish enough to follow you. But the Lannister forces remain with me, as does the Golden Company, seeing as it is my gold that pays for it. Joffrey stared for a moment and then stamped a foot. That would leave me with the City Watch and the Imps barbarians. No, actually. Tyrion said, looking past the king and gazing longingly at the wine on his father's desk. The clansmen stay with me. The hate from Joffrey's eyes could melt steel. He looked imploringly at his mother and then back to his grandfather. "You will order the men to march north?" "No," Tywine replied as casually as if he was brushing some stray lint from his tunic. "I'll remove you from the position of hand." Tywine matched the king's gaze. "You are welcome to try. It is just me, or has the room's temperature plunged?" Joffrey opened his mouth, but his grandfather cut him off with a wave of his hand. "Allow me to explain things to you, Your Grace. Any man who calls himself a king is no true king. You rule because of me. You exist because of me. Should I wish to remove you, I will do so. Truth to tell, nothing would give me greater pleasure." Cersei gasped. Tyrion smiled inwardly. "You should have seen this coming, sweet sister. You couldn't control the little ingrate and now he has to pay the price." Tywine ignored his daughter. "Continue in this vein and I will remove you. Your brother or sister could easily fill the void left by your ineptitude. They could hardly do a worse job." "How dare?" Tywine drew himself up to his full height, an impressive display considering he was so much older than the king. "I dare because I am the man who makes your rule possible. I detested your father and only support you because you are my grandson. However, that support will be withdrawn if you do not remember your place. Which is to be silent, and to do as you are told." "Father, Cersei began. "Silence!" Tywine snapped at her. The queen's mouth opened but nothing came forth. She stared in shock. Even Kevan Lannisters, Tywine's brother who had followed him for years as his strong right hand and trusted counselor, seemed shocked at the showdown between the king and his grandfather. "Guards," Tywine said, sitting back down in his chair. "Escort the king to his chambers. He is to stay there until I summon him." The king stood rooted to the spot, staring in shock. His eyes were bewildered and yet hatred creased the corners of his eyes. Suddenly 2 Lannister guardsmen were behind him. Their presence startled the king. He glared at the armored men and then looked towards his mother. Seeing no help, the boy stalked off through the chamber doors, glowering at everything and everyone he could find. Gods help anyone unfortunate enough to come across him between here and his bedchamber. There was a momentary lull in the Han Solo, almost as if the king storming out had taken with it the power of speech. Tyrion smiled at the situation. "You do realize you just sent the most powerful man in Westeros to bed without his supper?" His father replied with a snort. "You're a fool if you believe he's the most powerful man in Westeros. Would that be because we're losing the war, or because even if we were winning you rule the king's forces?" Cersei started angrily. "Joffrey is still the king," she pointed out unnecessarily. Lord Tywine shot a glance at the door as if still able to see the departing monarch. "Much good will it do him? Joffrey is young," Cersei argued. "He just needs guidance to become the king he's capable of being. And, wouldn't that be a joy to behold? The realm will have to suffer under either a Robert II or Aerys III." Their Lord Father merely returned his attention to the scrolls to his desk. He picked up his quill and began to write. After a moment he sensed that no one else had taken his hint to leave and looked up. Was there something else? "Oh, just 1 or 2 things, like an actual plan." Tyrion exchanged a look with his sister, who shared a similar look of concern. "7 hells, the day I'm making common course with her is the day I should find a place in a September, say my vows and spend the rest of my life a silent mute." "Forgive me, father," Tyrion said acidly. "But may we know your intended strategy? Do we intend to wait for Daenerys Targaryen to arrive, hope she doesn't kill us out of hand, and then make common cause against our enemy?" Tywine Lannister did not stop writing, but still he spoke. "Kevan, is the army prepared?" Tyrion's uncle straightened and nodded, though Tywine's attention was elsewhere. "It is, my lord. We'll be ready to march as early as tomorrow." The imp stared in shock. He looked around the room, ignoring Cersei. "That pretty fool has no more idea of what's going on than I do." What he saw that no answer to the obvious question was forthcoming, he decided to force the issue. Swallowing his anger, he asked, "Are we going somewhere?" His Lord Father did not cease his writing, the quill scratching Tywine's formal script across the parchment in neat strokes. "Why, to Harrenhal and Riverrun, obviously." Cersei let forth an involuntary gasp. It was muted, but Tyrion heard it as, he suspected, did Tywine and Kevan. Tywine did not pay his children any mind, he just continued to write. Kevan poured himself some wine, also not looking at either Tyrion or Cersei. Pair of fuckers. All right father, you win. I may be a bit dense, but didn't you just get through chastising the king for the very action you now seem to be taking? Tywine paused mid-flow, he looked up from his writing. I said nothing about the merit of his suggestion. Joffrey just needed to be brought under control. However, his basic analysis of the situation is correct. It is. Cersei seemed to have found her voice. Indeed. Lord Tywine replied as he affixed his seal to the document in front of him. The Stark forces are in disarray. While the events at the wedding of Edmure Tully did not fully to plan. That's an understatement if ever there was one. The fact remains, his father went on, that Robb Stark is injured and unable to fight. Edmure Tully is dead, as are a host of Riverlands and Northern lords. Roose Bolton and Walder Free may have failed, but they are both now enemies of the Starks. Their forces are embroiled in infighting. Walder Free is most likely dead, his house probably destroyed. Tyrion replied. True, Tywine conceded, but there will be free troops in the Westerlands that the Stark-Tyrell alliance will have to remove. This will take time and cost them. Kevan nodded. We have already sent a raven to Ryman Free at Ashmark to ensure he is aware that his house has turned on the Tullys and Starks, and they will likely move to arrest and execute him. He will not be caught by surprise when a force arrives to remove him. Tyrion was unconvinced. I thought Aunt Jenna said that Ryman was a fool. Perhaps he is, but the man will not surrender if he has nothing to look forward to beyond a summary execution which, thanks to us, will be exactly what he expects. Ryman Free cannot have more than a few hundred men. Cersei remarked. As always sister, you miss the point. Most likely. Kevan replied, but every Stark or Tyrell man that falls in order to remove the phrase will be one less we have to fight ourselves. Tyrion's uncle looked over a scroll before him. Lord Varys has estimated that the strength of House Free numbered at around 5,000 men, when counting the smaller houses and vassals that served him. They'll be able to put up a struggle if nothing else. Clever, Tyrion admitted. What of Roose Bolton? Varys says he escaped the wedding and is headed east to the Vale. Where your ally Littlefinger awaits. Tyrion said, realization coming to him. Quite. Tywine remarked. Baelish will make sure that Roose Bolton is given a ship so that he can sail up the Weeping Water back to the Dread Fort. From there he will have no choice but to fight against the Stark's forces on the eastern coast. House Umber and Karstark, previously untouched by the fight with the Ironborn, will be dragged into the conflict. The Hand of the Kings gave a little humorless smile. With the Greyjoys continuing the raid up and down the western coast, that will mean that all the major northern houses, most of whom have lost their liege lords, will be under attack. We'll also have reports of wildlings massing at the wall. Kevan said, indicating another scroll. The Lord Commander has sent out several ravens across the realm asking for aid. The north faces attacks from north, east and west. Tywine stated, sitting back in his chair and setting his clasped hands in front of him. What forces that remain there will be hard-pressed to fight off their many enemies, and their friends in the south will be continually strained to know that their homes are under attack with no chance of relief. In fact, Kevan Lannister added. We wouldn't be surprised that, absent Robb Stark's leadership, the Northmen fragment and launch attacks against Moat Cailin in a scramble to get home. Well, don't you have it all sewn up? You forget, Robb Stark isn't dead. Tyrion's father glared at him. When I begin to forget things, you may light a funeral pyre and put me on it. Dead or alive? Well, that would be fun beyond words. The issue is one of timing. As soon as we have Jaime, we will march north as fast as we can. Tywine Lannister declared. You two will remain here and hold the city. Wonderful, because it went so well the first time. Tywine sat forward, setting his quill down. First we hit Harrenhal with all our strength. During our brief stay a few months back we made good note of all the castle's weaknesses. We will overwhelm the Riverland garrison through numbers and subterfuge. Then we will divide our forces. A small host will head north and siege Riverrun, the rest will head west to liberate our home. Where, oh where, do you think to get the men for that? Tyrion cried. He made no attempt to hide his consternation. We have no chance of fighting either the Starks or the Tyrells if we divide forces. We will have allies. Kevan replied, defensively. We will have an army of knights and footmen to aid our fight. Oh. Tyrion shot back, anger overriding caution. Where in the name of the stranger are you going to get them from? His father looked long and hard at him, matching the imp's angry expression with one of icy calmness. He sat very still as he spoke, the Vale. Tyrion pulled up short. Cersei spoke out. Why would the Vale help us? They are, by far, more aligned with the Starks and the Tullys. Kevan nodded thoughtfully, but he smiled wryly. The lords and knights of the Vale will do as Lady Arryn commands. The Queen looked perplexed. Lysa Arryn is Catelyn's sister, Robb Stark's aunt. Why would that bitch ever fight for us? On her own she wouldn't. Kevan replied, however, her husband has been convinced to support us. Husband? Cersei said, surprised, cocking her head as if she had not heard properly. What husband? Tyrion was way ahead of her. Of course, Petyr Baelish has been compelled to enter the fray. No doubt out of fear that the Starks and Tullys will discover that he betrayed their precious Ned. Still the proposition bothered him. What's in it for Littlefinger? Tyrion asked casually. Not that it matters, the mere threat of being ratted out to the Starks would have been enough for Baelish to come down on the Lannister side. I have made Petyr Baelish the Lord of Harrenhal. Tywine said with equal nonchalance. Janos Slynt was made Lord of Harrenhal, Cersei said angrily. He was made so by Joffrey for his loyalty during Ned Stark's attempted coup. Inwardly Tyrion cringed. The man was a brigand, one rung above a common cutthroat. Slynt was appointed to the position. Tywine said, looking imperiously at his daughter. Though whether such an appointment was wise is another matter entirely. Cersei glowered. Slynt proved loyal at a crucial time. Without him we may have lost the capital. And after he went round butchering the illegitimate children of Robert Baratheon, he almost cost you the capital as well. Tywine responded. You should ask Joffrey about that little travesty. In any case it matters not. When your brother forced him to take the Black, he forfeited his lands and titles. A useful development as being granted the lordship of Harrenhal allowed Baelish to present himself as a worthy suitor to the widow Arryn. Correct me if I'm wrong. Tyrion spoke up. But we don't actually have Harrenhal in our possession to give him. It doesn't matter. Kevan told him. The title suits our purpose more than the relic itself ever will. The Queen looked perplexed. Fine, Baelish married the Arryn, so much good will that do him? Actually, Kevan cut her off. It does him and us a good deal. Baelish has assembled his full force near the Eyrie. Almost 40,000 men. The mountains of the moon provide ideal cover for the mustering of such a large force. Now that he's ready, he's agreed to lead the army of the Vale west through the Bloody Gate, down the high road. He'll cross the Trident and attack Harrenhal from behind. Kevan pointed at a map on the desk. The Riverlanders will be caught between our two forces and crushed. Tyrion walked forward to the map. He had to admit it was a cunning plan. I suppose that is when you divide your forces. Quite. Kevan said, a small smile on his features. The majority of the troops from the Vale will go north to crush the remaining Stark force at the Twins. A detachment will go northwest with us and attack Riverrun. We don't have to take it, just siege it with a small force. Ah. Tyrion uttered, looking the map over. Just tie up the garrison there while the majority of the Lannister force goes down the river road and attacks the Tyrell force at Casterly Rock. Exactly. Kevan said, smiling. Why has this not been done before? Cersei asked, why has it taken so long to negotiate Baelish's support? The ingrate is supposed to be our servant. Littlefinger serves no one but Littlefinger. Tyrion interjected, looked at his father and uncle for confirmation. I suspect our former Master of Coin was using his position in the Vale to lever the best deal possible for our support. Tywine Lannister gave the smallest of nods. Easily dismissed as a small twitch of the head. Encouraged, Tyrion pressed on. Besides, I suspect it's taken Baelish all this time to convince Lysa and the Lords of the Vale to throw in with us. It has been difficult, Kevan conceded, sipping a goblet of wine. In the end, Littlefinger has had to have Lady Arryn invoke the various lords' oaths of loyalty and order her troops to attack the Starks. As a pretext for the action, Baelish has concocted a fine tale about how Robb Stark is trying to deprive Lysa and thus Robin Arryn of his inheritance as potential heir to the Riverlands following Hoster and Edmure Tully's death. Madness, it can't possibly work. We were responsible for Edmure Tully's death, Tyrion pointed out. If that comes out, I wouldn't want to be Littlefinger. Immaterial, Tywin said, sounding bored. Once the fight has started, it will be almost impossible to disengage. Besides, the blame for the wedding is being placed on the Freys and the Ironborn. I promise you, Baelish will ensure that not a word of our involvement ever reaches the Lords of the Vale. Otherwise, oaths or not, those same honorable Vale Lords will execute poor Littlefinger. Most likely by casting him out of that moon door they are so fond of. Tyrion shuddered at the thought of the large wooden entranceway that heralded a steep drop and a hideous death. That could have been my fate if not for Bronn. What of the Westerlands itself? Cersei asked, crossing her arms. The Tyrells have conquered almost all the small castles and now lay siege to Casterly Rock. As if father needs to be reminded about that. I agree, Tyrion said slowly, his mind thinking fast. Even if what you say comes to pass, you'll still be heavily outnumbered at the Rock. Plus, I do not like our chances against Randyll Tarly. The man may be a bore of the highest order, but you'd be hard-pressed to find a better soldier. Randyll Tarly isn't there, Kevan Lannister replied. He's been kept east at the Twins by request of Olenna Tyrell. Only Lord Mace or his Willers can overrule the old woman, and they have their hands full. My. The Queen of Thorns seems to have got herself caught in a prickly bush. Daikon Tarly has been left in charge at Casterly Rock, Lord Tywin informed them. The boy is young and vainglorious, easily bored by the monotony of a siege. Euron Greyjoy has been leading him and Paxter Redwyne a merry chase up and down the coast. Euron Greyjoy? Cersei enquired. Balon's younger brother and successor to the Seastone chair, Kevan said. The man is reportedly more cunning and malicious than his brother, but those are traits we can use. The new Greyjoy commander has already stepped up his attacks across the Reach. The Shield Islands have already fallen to Ironborn raids. Mace Tyrell is reportedly outraged. Both he and Daikon Tarly have been slowly depleting their forces to fight the Ironborn on the western coast. All the while we've been using the small gaps in the siege lines either by land or sea to resupply the Rock. Fuck me. I have to admit I don't like the man my father is, but he's a clever bastard. By the time we face Daikon Tarly, or even Randyll Tarly should he arrive back at the Rock in time, Tywin intoned. The force we will be, it's time to end this. Chapter 45, The Battle of Harrenhal. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Jaime I. The flames from the brazier cast a gloomy pale across the men who stood around the map table. The harsh light showing weathered faces and furrowed brows. Gods, the last war council was much more cheery. Back then of course it was an invasion rather than a fight for survival. But then war should be like that, everything at stake with nothing held back. How else are you supposed to feel alive? Jaime looked down the tent, observing his father. Lord Tywin looked regal as he moved counters across the map table, setting out dispositions for the upcoming battle. Clad in his riding clothes from the day's march, the Warden of the West still looked alert and ready for a night of planning. Wish I felt the same. Jaime was bone-weary from the ride and the endless drills his father was insisting on him doing to get him battle-ready. They were all there. The principal commanders of the Lannister host. Lord Tywin, Kevan Lannister, Lord Harys Swyft, Sir Gregor Clegane, Sir Adam Marbrand, Jaime himself. Also present was the Captain General of the Golden Company, Harry Strickland, who stood at attention, his amiable face looking on the map table as if trying to divine its purpose. His father looked up from the table. It is confirmed. Kevan Lannister nodded in confirmation. It is, my lord. The young wolf has returned to the field. The scouts report that they've seen his standard amongst the camp at Harrenhal. Tywin grunted. Excellent. A wounded man, straight from his sickbed, makes for an even better opponent for us. Surely he won't command. Lord Swyft asked, if the spider's reports are accurate, he was grievously injured at the twins. Jaime smiled. It would seem that he wasn't as injured as Roose Bolton and Walder Free would have liked. Tywine gave him a stern look before turning again to his brother. Have scouts confirmed the numbers at Harrenhal? His sibling looked wistful. It's hard to tell, my lord. As you well know, the castle itself makes any force look small, though it appears teeming with men, and Harrenstown is full of soldiers.